August in 2020, I moved in with my aunt and uncle to an insanely small rural town in California. When I first moved there, a friend of mine had made it a point to show me that someone could drive across the whole town within 5 minutes, and at the time I didn't realize how important that fact would become to the safety of me and my loved ones. My best friend Haley and I, her 17 and me being 18 years old at the time, were hanging out at a park that was about a 5 to 10 minute walk from where I lived. And I say park because there were a few tables and benches, and it was technically known as a town park, but in reality it was more a small grass clearing surrounded by woods and a dirt trail near the bank of a river. I had started to frequent this place after moving, walking down to the benches and trail to smoke or sit by the water. I had never really noticed any suspicious characters before this, even though I had plenty warned about a couple creepers that were in the area known for bothering young girls. Haley and I had been smoking for a bit unbothered in the clearing when we decided to finish our little trip with exploring the trail a little bit and just taking in all the scenery. We had been walking and talking for about 5 minutes when I started to get this tension in my shoulders, like that feeling you get when you know someone is looking at you. I looked behind us and there was a man on the trail with us. Granted, this path is pressed right against the side wall of a gated community, so seeing people going on walks and jogging was fairly common. I told my friend of the man's presence, but she had just written it off as me being anxious. But she had a good point that I tend to be a bit hyper-aware at times, but something about the man felt wrong in my gut. We kept walking, and I would periodically look back and keep tabs on the dark-haired, middle-aged man walking about 50 feet behind us. After not too long at all, the man started picking up pace behind us. Calm, casual walking became more of a speed walk, and I turned around completely and started walking backwards to try and communicate to this man that I was completely aware of his presence. He had moved toward the side of the trail, looking like he was about to walk through the brush down to the river. I felt a bit stupid for being so worried. Turning back around, I resumed walking forward, but glanced back one more time to be sure that he was gone. As I looked behind us for the last time, I saw the man in a full sprint, charging back onto the trail straight toward me and Haley. I grabbed her sleeve with one hand and pulled out my pocket knife with the other. I can't remember what I said to her, but we started sprinting down the trail as fast as we could. I had never gone far down this path and had no idea where it led. The man chasing us was blocking our way back to the clearing in the road. His footsteps on the dirt grew louder, getting closer. I let go of Haley's sleeve to pull out my phone and called my uncle while still running. I told him we were being followed on the trail at the park, but I couldn't give him an exact location. I had never gone much further than the entrance and didn't know where the trail led to. My uncle told me to stay on the phone and make as much noise as possible so he could find us. I let out the loudest, shrillest scream I could muster as we kept running, and finally we reached the end of the path where an old metal fence surrounded some trees and what looked like an abandoned house or shed. Nearby, we saw the back corner of the outer wall for the gated community, and in that split second it seemed like our best option. I yanked us off the dirt path and into the trees lining the cement wall. I yelled at Haley to climb as fast as she could, boosting her from the bottom so she could use a tree and the ledge to get over the top. I threw my pocket knife and phone over the wall and somehow scrambled up and over myself as fast as I could. I landed face first onto a neatly trimmed patch of grass inside the gated community, startling a man who had been calmly walking his dog. I became acutely aware of how strange we must have looked. Two panicked teenagers yelling and holding a knife. But the man seemed to realize that we were in trouble. He rushed over to ask if we needed help, and while Haley explained the situation, I got back to my phone with my uncle and told him that we had made it into the gated community. And not even a minute later, we heard my uncle shouting from the trail. He yelled threats at the man who had chased us, making it clear that he had a firearm and wasn't afraid to use it. The man with the dog led us to a small access gate along the wall and unlocked it so we could meet my uncle on the trail. My uncle told us that he had driven his car through the park and up to the trail entrance as fast as possible before running to find us. He hadn't seen anyone on his way in. After checking to make sure that we were okay, I retold what had happened in greater detail now that the panic was wearing off. My uncle escorted us back to his car, his firearm in plain sight, ready in case the man showed himself again. We didn't see him on the way back, and I haven't returned to that place since, but for a long time after, I was constantly paranoid that I was being followed whenever I left the house. We were never able to figure out who that man was, and I haven't seen him since that day.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
My friend and I decided to go on a late-night drive to find this creepy cemetery one night. Great start to a story, I know, but we were bored and in a small town with nothing else to do. After close to 40 minutes of driving, we got to the state park. Now typically, parks are closed after dark, but these roads were still public access, so they weren't off limits to general drivers. However, we were the only cars on the road at this point, and it was isolated, we thought. The lanes were surrounded by thick trees, and it was dark. No streetlight dark. We're on a narrow dirt lane looking for this cemetery, but we drive by it, unknowingly. The area we were driving through was kind of like a square of roads with only one way in and out. We get to the crossroads, where the road we are on goes straight through, or you can continue back through by a left-only turn. Next to the ditch across the road from us, we see a dark green sedan pulled into the brush, no lights on, no people around it, not an accident from all we could tell. Whatever, kind of weird, but we slowly turned left and began to loop back around looking for the small rows of old headstones again. As we get back around the intersection about 5 minutes later, the green sedan is still pulled off in the bushes. But now, it's not the only vehicle there. There's a big pickup truck, idling in the dark across from us, blocking the straightaway. Now, it had to have come from the other direction since no other cars passed us or were in front of us or behind us. That was the way we had planned to go, to leave the park since we hadn't found what we were looking for, but we couldn't pass through. This truck was in the middle of the road, taking up all the space on either side. At first, we were thinking, this guy's pal probably got his car stuck and called for help. Then this truck guy turns on his headlights, his high beams, and starts revving his engine hard. My friend and I exchange looks, like wondering who's overcompensating for something, and when we turn back, trying to see through the blinding light, we see a silhouette of a big, bulky man. He's standing in front of the truck, hands on his hips, just standing there. We aren't a car's length and a half away from this guy, and there's nowhere to go but left, which we know just leads us back around to the same place. We sit staring at each other for a few moments, trying to decide what to do. My friend starts pulling the car forward at a snail pace, trying to keep as much distance between us and this truck as possible, and we make the left turn. He's just standing there, not moving, looking in our direction. We weren't scared yet, really. But I'm a bit paranoid generally, so I was waiting for him to lunge at the car, throw something at us or something. I don't know, it just really felt off. After we turn, I check the rear view and see the guy holding something as he takes a few steps behind our car in the outline of the light. It's long, barrel-shaped and threatening looking. We peel out of there now, wanting to put distance between us, but forgetting we are stuck in this square of roads. When we get back to about halfway, we begin to see the start of the straightaway in the truck, whose headlights we can still see. We pull off to the side of the road, trying to figure out how we can exactly get out of this situation. I look out the window and see that we are sitting right next to the cemetery we had been looking for, but we are both too freaked to get out now, and we laugh at the irony for a second. Then we see headlights coming from behind us, It's the guy, and it gets closer. We see it's a white SUV, and it slows next to our car. The window rolls down, and it's a car full of guys our age. "What are you guys up to out here?" the driver says. "We're just here for a drive." And they say some stuff out of earshot. My friends and I don't have a strong, menacing aura, so we hoped we could just send some chill vibes and have them leave us off the hook for whatever was going on. Were they with the truck guy? Because this wasn't truck guy, but was all too weird. We asked if they'd seen a truck ahead, where they had to have driven in, but they said that they hadn't. When we looked back, we noticed the lights from the oncoming direction were gone. They laugh and pull away slowly, telling us to have a good night, and we pull back onto the road and take off for the exit, only looking out the windows long enough to notice that only the sedan was still there. "Sorry, buddy. Hope your car's alright." We made it back to his parents' place without further incident and told them about the encounter, but we couldn't explain what had happened really. It still kind of sounds stupid when I write it out, but something was going on.
Isn't it fun going camping with your friends? The sheer joy of being surrounded by the twinkling stars, indulging in fun-filled activities, exchanging secrets, and narrating spine-chilling tales while gathered around a blazing campfire is unparalleled, right? However, what if all this takes a turn for the worse? What if your much-awaited outdoor excursion turns into a living nightmare? Allow me to recount my harrowing experience, where a camping trip with my friends transformed into a spine-tingling ordeal. 7 years ago, as we were cruising down the road in the convertible, Jack suddenly burst out laughing and drew our attention. "Hey, did you see that? Quan just swallowed a bug," he said, still laughing as if he had just delivered the best joke ever, while we all gave him a disapproving look. In response, Quan threw his backpack at Jack in annoyance, making him groan, while he said, "Hey, that's because of the speed of the convertible, you bastard," which made the rest of us laugh. "Why are you so offended? Don't you guys eat bugs for breakfast or something?" he jeered, thinking he was funny, which was only annoying. But Quan wasn't one to back down, and he responded with a sharp retort, "At least our parents are at the breakfast table, unlike yours." "Stop it, you guys. And Jack, you need to stop throwing insults as a joke." It was clear that Jack's sense of humor had gone too far, so I scolded him for his behavior. "Hey, men joke like that among each other. You're a girl, so you don't know," he said, pouting, feeling insulted by my actions. Henry, who had been quiet the whole time, finally spoke up. "I'm also a man, so how come I don't know about such jokes?" he asked, trying to diffuse the tension and lighten the mood. But Jack was already sulking and pouting, claiming that he was joking and we were being mean to him. We all knew his excuses were invalid, and we couldn't help but laugh while he glared at the road ahead with furrowed brows. Although we knew that Jack's intentions were not to cause harm and that he was trying to be funny, his jokes often crossed the line and were hurtful. We have all been victims of his rude sense of humor, but at the same time, he has had our backs whenever we needed him. So despite his weird personality, we genuinely cared about him. The 4 of us were going on a camping trip. There were supposed to be 5, but Claire canceled at the last minute, leaving me all alone with these goofs. Henry was the only person who seemed a bit reliable, not because he was my boyfriend, maybe a little because of that, but mostly because he acted more maturely than others when he needed to. We reached the campsite around 5 in the evening and set up our tents. Nobody else was around in that area except for us, which was fine since we would probably be louder than a truck horn. "So, who got the booze?" Jack asked, glancing in the direction of Quan. He pointed toward the car, and the 2 of them went to the car with arms locked to bring out the rest of the supplies. I could never understand these guys. Nearly an hour ago, they were like two negatively charged objects, but now they acted like long-lost brothers who had never quarreled. Releasing a deep sigh, I began to take the food out of my bag. My eyes met Henry, who seemed to be staring at me. "What?" I asked, which made him look away with the embarrassment of being caught. "Nothing," he replied, scratching the back of his neck. I dropped whatever I was doing, walked to him, and looked into his eyes as I asked, "Tell me." "You are just so beautiful that I can't help myself." I smiled while blushing to my ears at his words. "You're so cute." I placed a peck on his lips as I wrapped my hands around his neck, making him pull me and deepen the kiss. I loved my dork. "Gross, you two. Get a room. We're here for fun, not puke." I rolled my eyes at Kwan's voice and turned to see them laughing while giving each other high fives. "Shut up, idiot," I said while grabbing a matchstick to start a campfire. When another attempt to light the fire failed, Jack laughed as he remarked, "Are you sure you know how to make a bonfire?" I glared at him in frustration while he playfully laughed, taking a sip from his beer can. Henry came forward to help me, but the fire wasn't starting. That was when I noticed an eerie, thick white fog spreading in our surroundings and swallowing Jack. We heard his scream from a distance, sending chills down our spines. We started calling for him, but he didn't respond. When we were about to go inside the fog to look for him, an old man emerged. He was wearing all white, had a long white beard, and his eyes were closed. He was giving off an ominous vibe. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine when a part of his beard grew longer and grabbed Henry by his throat. And before I could blink, it pulled him in, and I heard a snap, which made me scream in terror. The man opened his eyes, which were white without any pupil or iris, and his mouth wider than a shark, before putting Henry's head in it, while the beard consumed the rest of the body. He then started crunching his head. The gruesome sight made me shudder in horror, making me so sick that I was ready to throw up when Kwan grabbed my hand and started running. I was so horrified that I couldn't process what was happening, and that was when I felt Kwan's hand being pulled away from me. I turned to see a white beard wrapped around him. I didn't want to let him go too, so I grabbed his hands even tighter and started pulling, but instead, I was the one being pulled toward the man. I saw a single tear fall from his eyes as Kwan pulled away his hand to let me escape. I couldn't help but scream his name as I saw him being consumed before I started running. I kept running and running without looking back until I found the highway. He didn't follow me for some reason, and I don't remember how, but I somehow managed to get to a police station and report everything. They seemed not to believe me, but they still assured me they would look for my friends. After getting to my apartment, I felt sick and couldn't eat or sleep for days. I even threw up multiple times. When I finally managed to sleep, I found myself getting chased by the same old man whose mouth was open, and he was this close to catching me when I woke up panting, covered in sweat. The police never found my friends, and after what happened to them, I know they never will. But despite being able to escape it that night, I'm still getting chased by him every time I close my eyes.
Growing up, my favorite thing in the world was going fishing with my two older brothers. We lived in a very rural area and would often hike out into the woods to go to various creeks to go fishing. We never really caught anything big in the creeks, but it wasn't as much about what we caught as much as it was about spending time with your brothers fishing. Stereotypically, we always got up way early in the morning on fishing day. We would begin hiking out to whichever creek we were going to and would watch the sun as it stole across the sky. It would be fully light outside as we got to where we were headed to. The scariest thing to ever happen on a fishing trip, of course, happened the first time that we had gotten to a new creek. We had set out that morning, determined to go further into the hills than we normally did. We passed by one or two of our regular fishing spots and kept going deeper and deeper into the woods. We found an absolutely amazing spot. It was thickly wooded, but the creek was huge. It was beautiful and even had a fallen tree stretched out over it. After we determined that it was sturdy enough, the three of us made our way over to the other side of the creek. We sat our stuff out and began to fish. The day wore on, and we weren't really catching anything. The fishing got boring after a bit, so we decided to do something we normally didn't do. Like I said, the creek was huge and it was quite deep too, so we decided to put aside our fishing poles and go swimming in the creek. I really don't know how long we had been swimming when I noticed that our middle brother stopped doing anything and began staring off in the woods. Our oldest brother asked him what was wrong, and he just motioned to the woods. "There's someone out in the woods, watching us," he said. My first thought was that some pervert was out there watching us, but when I followed my brother's finger pointing out towards the woods, those thoughts quickly evaporated. Standing off in the trees was a huge man. It wasn't too dark that we couldn't make out some of his features. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, which struck me as odd as it was pretty warm out. He had a baseball cap on his head that was sitting low over his face. But the most striking feature he had was that he was holding what looked to be a rifle or shotgun in his hand. We weren't sure what to do. Going into the woods, we knew that we were trespassing. We never actually knew whose property we were on, but we did know that the places that we hiked and fished on didn't belong to us. Except up until this point, we had never gotten caught before. Both of us younger boys looked at our brother for instruction as to what to do. He seemed just as worried as we did, though, and didn't give us any direction. He just kept looking at the man standing there and watched. My brother suggested we try and get ourselves over to our stuff, take it, and leave. However, this was daunting because that was the side of the creek the guy was on. We slowly made our way over to our things. However, before we got to shore, an old hag came running out of the woods, shrieking like a freaking banshee. I got startled and fell back into the water, struggling until my middle brother pulled me back up again. The old nasty woman actually ran over to our things, our poles, and our clothes. She started grabbing the things and screaming, "Mine, mine, mine, mine!" She was gathering all of our things in her arms, dropping a few of them when she had too much in her arms. "Yay, stop that!" my oldest brother yelled, and began to try and move faster to the shore. My middle brother reached out and put his hand on his shoulder and pointed back to the big guy in the woods. When we moved back towards the shore, he began moving closer, and he held the gun up as he walked. "Holy shit!" I distinctly remember yelling. "We're sorry we trespassed on your property," my middle brother shouted, but they didn't pay any attention to us. "He's not gonna shoot us," my oldest brother said, and began moving towards the old hag to get his things. As he did, though, the old woman saw him, and she took a fillet knife out of her pocket and started waving it at my brother. "I'll cut you!" she screamed at him, her arms still overflowing with our things. By now the big hillbilly was by the shore of the creek, and he had the shotgun cocked and was pointing it at my oldest brother. He, of course, stopped in his tracks. It was a tense moment as we stood, cold in the water with this guy pointing his gun right in our faces. Once the woman had gathered up our clothes and fishing gear in her hands, the guy said one thing to us: "Get." We didn't have to be told twice. All three of us swam to the other side of the creek, got out of the water, and got out of there. It sucks because we had to walk through the woods in nothing but soaked shorts. We didn't even have shoes, and the twigs and rocks and leaves hurt our feet. But we were too scared to even consider going back. We fortunately did not get chewed out for losing our stuff. Our dad told us that there are some messed up people out in the woods, and we had to be careful. It was a long time, though, before we were brave enough to go fishing again. Surprisingly, this is one of those stories I forgot about until a few days ago when I was talking to a school friend on call and I got reminded of this. She was pretty freaked when I told her. You see, this happened when I was roughly maybe 7 or 8, so some of the details are a bit fuzzy, but I remember it pretty vividly. This may seem like unimportant context, but my family had just moved to America and were renting the top portion of your regular suburban house in a pretty safe cul-de-sac. I had friends, they were triplets, about 3 or 4 houses down, not far at all, and every day I'd go hang out with them. And around 9 or 10 in the night, my older brother, around 11 or 12 I'd say, would make the 2-minute walk and come and get me and walk me home since I was pretty young. One night he came to get me as usual. The sun wasn't fully down, but it was getting pretty dark. We started down the walk as normal when he started casting glances over his shoulder. I didn't really notice until he shoved me hard away from the sidewalk and between 2 houses. Each house had a huge fence that separated their backyard, not ours though, and he'd made me crouch behind the fence. I remember being really scared but more confused since I had no damn idea what the hell was going on. More specifically, he was a pretty big prankster. Once he convinced me my older sister crashed her car into the ocean, so I didn't really believe him when he turned and said, "Walk behind the houses. I think someone's following us." Now, looking back now, he was probably trying to keep me calm. However, whatever calm was left in my tiny 8-year-old body was gone the moment that I turned around and looked. The man had followed us behind the houses, and he was just by the edge of a few houses down near a different fence line. He had a black hoodie on, with the hood up, black sweatpants, and white sneakers. I had pretty bad eyesight due to some health problems, but back then it was crystal clear, and I could see with horrifying clarity that his jaw was just hanging open, like he was just standing there with his jaw hung open. It was horrifying. I think now that I'm older, maybe he had some kind of medical condition that affected his jaw, or maybe he did crack, I don't know. But back then, I could have sworn on God that I was seeing some kind of demon. Now anyway, my brother, when he saw that I was looking and getting ready to freak out, he told me, "Just run, as fast as I can to our house." And we booked it. Neither of us looked back, but we were so scared out of our minds. And like I said, we only rented the top portion of the house, so the bottom, with a sliding door in the backyard, belonged to some other tenant. I don't remember if she was home or not, but I remember tugging that thing open and locking it as fast as I can, and when I looked up, he was there in the yard, a little away from the door, just staring at us, with that jaw. Me and my brother told my sister and my mother immediately. My father was away for a work trip at the time, but nothing came of it. Not until the day after. We went to meet my dad at his warehouse, which had a small live-in portion above it where we lazed around until he was ready to head home with us. Around dusk, he came up and told us that we might have to wait since the police were there. He walked us around to the back window of the small area to show us police officers all around the backyard area of the warehouses. There were a few in line and a white van parked on the grass by the edge of the woods. Like I said, I was pretty young, so I don't remember many details of what actually happened, but I do remember my dad, who hadn't been told about the day prior, telling us that they found a man and a woman in the van. The man, he said, had his mouth hanging wide open. He seemed really disturbed while telling me about the whole thing and wouldn't answer any more questions about the woman. Maybe she was dead. I have zero idea. I do know that they were arrested on trespassing charges. I don't know anything else, and I haven't asked about it. I doubt that he'd remember. It's been over a decade, and he's pushing 70, but it freaks me out to this day. I still can't believe it happened, and I don't have any answers for it. I talked to my brother briefly about it in hopes that he remembered more than I do, but all I got was a long tirade about whatever medical condition the guy probably had for his mouth to be like that. He's an annoying medical student now, and sometimes I think maybe the guy didn't mean any harm and was just drugged out of his mind, but this was in the world's safest neighborhood and doesn't explain why or how he showed up at my dad's workplace.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all this support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Stalked. After completing my college education, I'd been living with my parents for a little over a year. I remember feeling grateful for their kindness and patience during that time, as I struggled to find a job and a suitable place to live. It was not an easy process, but I kept myself motivated and optimistic and eventually landed a job that I enjoyed, in a cozy apartment that I could call my own. The job I got was to work from home since people were still scared that Corona could strike again, and they didn't want to risk it. The pay I received was quite reasonable, especially for a recent graduate like me, and it allowed me to purchase things I needed online on platforms like Amazon. Unfortunately, I couldn't control my urge to keep shopping, and my expenses started to increase gradually. Soon after, I found myself scrolling through the app for hours, and even though I didn't need anything, I ended up ordering stuff anyway. Over time, I realized I had developed an unhealthy shopping habit, and it was causing me more harm than good. That day, as I heard the doorbell ring, I quickly made my way to the front door. On opening the door, I came face to face with a middle-aged woman who was delivering my order. I couldn't help but notice how well she looked for her age, so I decided to compliment her to be polite and make her feel good about herself. She blushed and responded with a heartfelt, "You really think so? Thanks. My husband never complimented me like that." Her response made me feel a little uneasy, and I couldn't help but think that she might be getting neglected by her husband or that she was probably divorced. In an attempt to make her feel good, I said, "His loss." She smiled and thanked me again before I closed the door to my apartment. However, as I looked back, I wish I hadn't said that. Ever since that day, every time I placed an order for food or any other item, I noticed this same delivery woman showing up at my doorstep to deliver it. Initially, I didn't find it unusual, and in fact, I appreciated the consistency in her service. However, with each subsequent delivery, I began to notice that she would give me strange compliments that made me feel deeply uncomfortable. She'd comment on my physical appearance and make personal remarks that crossed the line of professionalism. Her behavior left me feeling uneasy and violated. As I continued to order from Amazon, her behavior became increasingly disturbing. I'd catch her staring at me through my windows, even when I had the blinds closed. With each other, the delivery timings only got later and later, and this made me feel uneasy. I couldn't shake off the feeling that she was doing it deliberately. It was as if she was keeping tabs on me, stalking me even. I tried to ignore it at first, but the feeling of frustration and fear only grew stronger. In the end, I made the difficult decision to stop ordering stuff, hoping that it would put an end to her stalking behavior. One night, I was startled awake by someone ringing my doorbell non-stop. I checked the time and it was past midnight. Without much thought, I got up and went to check who it was, and as I opened the door, I found the delivery woman standing there with red eyes and smelling like alcohol. She grabbed my collar all of a sudden and asked in a very drunk voice why I stopped ordering stuff. I was terrified as to why she was doing this, but before I could say anything, she passed out. Now, I wasn't the kind of guy who would leave a drunk woman alone at my doorstep so predators could take their chances, no matter how much of a creep the woman was. But I didn't want to let her inside my house either, so I called the police and informed them about everything. Soon after, 2 officers arrived and escorted her. A few days went by, and that day I was out shopping at Walmart. When I came home, I was terrified to see that woman sitting on my couch waiting for me. She had a crazed look in her eyes as she looked at me entering. I asked what is she doing inside and how she got in, and she just looked at me weirdly and said, "I'm here for you. I want to make you the happiest man on earth." Trust me, being a man doesn't automatically mean that we would feel flattered or happy if a woman were to stalk us. On the contrary, it could be an incredibly frightening experience, as I was at the moment. I felt a sense of unease and vulnerability, knowing that if things went wrong, she could easily make false accusations against me. As a man, I also felt that I might not be believed if I tried to report what was happening to me. Feeling terrified and overwhelmed and unsure of what to do, I nervously stepped out of my apartment and quickly dialed my mom's phone number. As soon as she answered, I poured out my heart and explained what had happened in my life over the past few days. My mom's voice soon turned fierce with anger as she listened to my story, and she promised to come to my aid immediately. Within just a few minutes, my mom arrived at my doorstep, and before heading in, she suggested that I go to her house where I'd be safe. I don't know what my mom had said to that woman, but after that day, I never saw her again. Before we parted ways, my mom offered me a word of advice that I've never forgotten. She warned me never to compliment another woman unless it was her or my girlfriend.
Back when I was a junior in high school, this guy transferred in from out of state who developed a serious obsession with me. It started out kind of harmless at first. He would try talking to me, but only ever about the weirdest stuff. Like if he'd been all sweet about asking me out, I definitely would have felt guilty turning him down, but because he was so obnoxious, I had zero qualms with telling him to get lost. A good example would be the first time I rejected him. Most guys might just take it in their stride, maybe think I was playing hard to get, but this kid heard my no and immediately just punched a locker right next to me. The sound of it had me jumping out of my skin, and the few doubts I had about rejecting him completely evaporated the moment he acted out like that. He didn't just punch the locker either, because he caused such a scene, he literally ran away from the lockers at full speed. It was seriously the most embarrassing and terrifying thing that had ever happened to me at that point. Well, at the hands of another human being, anyway. He did seem to take a few steps back following this little outburst, but he soon redoubled his efforts, joining every after-school club I was a member of. When they were done, he'd follow me home at a distance. One time my dad caught him doing it and chased him up the street after that. It became this huge family issue. I just found the whole thing thoroughly mortifying, I guess because I just didn't get how serious it was. It was annoying, kind of scary even, but I didn't think he had what it took to actually hurt me. But as it turned out, that wasn't really the issue. After a few months of my turning down dates, he told me if I didn't want to go out with him, that he would take his own life. I still said no. I've found stuff like that sort of emotional blackmail, to be frankly disgusting, and instead of having its intended effect to garner my sympathy, I hated this kid more than ever. The whole feeling was grounded in the idea that he just wouldn't do anything, that he didn't have the guts, the balls. He was all empty threats and grand theatrical displays, or So I thought. The next few days, he was missing from school. Rumors were around that he actually did take his own life, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't freak me out think he actually had gone through and done it. I mean, that'd be something that'd stay with me for the rest of my life. A kid told me he'd end himself if I didn't date him. I didn't, so he did. But God, if I didn't feel like punching him in the face as soon as he showed up again, I figured he'd just skip school for a few days to scare me a little bit. Mission accomplished. And this confirmed that he didn't have the balls to do it. He was wearing bandages when he showed up again and actually cornered me at lunch to say, "You made me do this." I just ignored him. I didn't want to actually ask to see the cuts, but a part of me is still so effing sure that they were covering up nothing at all. But the next big incident was at the end of our senior year. After a club meeting, I stayed behind to help clean up. My friend had stepped out to go grab something from their lockers, so I didn't see my stalker walk back into the room. He must have just saw his opportunity, came up behind me, and grabbed my chest. I don't remember what he said, but I was so freaked out that I actually squealed. That's the point I got the cops involved. As the room's security camera captured the whole thing, the whole ordeal ended up in court. He got a conviction, and I think his handsiness actually cost him his place at his preferred college too. It was a little piece of revenge that I cherished, but it turned out it just gave him a whole bunch of free time that he could use to stalk me. I became absolutely paranoid with him hanging around my college campus, and by that stage he was exhibiting every possible behavior of a controlling, manipulative sociopath. I just remember being terrified that he'd eventually try something worse. I finally transferred schools, and about a year later, I started getting emails from him, most of which were apologies for how mean he was to me and asking if I forgave him. But the emails quickly turned into him begging for my Facebook info. I had him blocked on Facebook since high school, and I absolutely didn't want him to know where I was going to school, so I ended up blocking him on my email too. Since then, I have not heard from him again, and I have also moved across the country for another reason entirely. But the move honestly brought me a lot of relief that I wouldn't accidentally run into him sometime, and the whole cycle might start again.
Back when I was in college, I used to work evening shifts at an independent coffee shop that happened to be right next door to this little bagel place. I think there must have been some degree of collusion between the two owners, as the bagel place was geared to be like a health nut place, whereas all the baked goods the coffee shop produced had like diabetes-inducing levels of sugar in them. So naturally, I'd often gone to the bagel place to grab a bite to eat before clocking in for my shift. Since the sugar craft that followed, one of the cinnamon buns was about as debilitating as they come, but that's how I met Tom. Tom worked full-time at the bagel place, and he was there to take my order like 9 out of 10 times that I stopped by. It wasn't long before he knew my order off by heart. Shortly after that, we were on first-name terms, and the more familiar we got, the more little gentle flirting entered into our daily exchanges. Wasn't mad about it? He was kind of cute, and it certainly didn't sting that he started giving me discounts. After a month or so, he asked me if I have a boyfriend. I said no. So he asked me if I'd like to grab a drink or something after our shift ends. The bagel place and the coffee shop closed within a half an hour of each other. I said sure, because why not, right? But oh my God, if I'd have known that kind of guy Tom was and have just resigned myself to getting fat from the Danishes at work, a few extra pounds would be easy to shake. But a full-blown stalker, not so much. Okay, so I didn't meet Tom after work that day, as I was too busy with an upcoming deadline. However, we did arrange to meet over the weekend, so we could see if we click. It definitely wasn't the greatest date I'd ever been on. Like, I don't think whatever chemistry we had really translated into a social conversational setting, but I didn't write them off altogether, and we agreed to go out next time we were both free. It's so weird to think he actually gave me space at first, like we went 48 hours at a time without talking sometimes. It really did seem chill. But then came the day when I walked into the bagel place and the manager was working the evening shift. This is highly out of the ordinary, so I asked her if Tom was sick or something. It's then she hits me with Tom isn't employed here anymore. We decided it was best that we parted ways. I'm shocked. So while I'm waiting for my order, I text Tom to ask him what the heck happened with his parting ways business. He replies pretty quickly, telling me that the manager had caught him giving me a discount and fired him as a result. Immediately, I felt terribly guilty, and I get the idea that if I pay off the difference from what was owed, I could maybe talk her into giving him his old job back. So right when I collected my bagel, I politely offered to pay back the discount if she considered offering Thomas's job back. I kind of embellished a little, making out that I'm the one who manipulated him into doing it, and the whole time the manager has this wow expression on her face. I think I'm making a solid point. She comes back with, "Oh, is that what he told you?" According to her, Tom hadn't been fired for giving discounts. It was her own policy that employees of local businesses get money off their food. He'd been fired because she'd received a number of complaints from female customers regarding his behavior towards them. His no was the flirt a little offered discounts, then eventually asked for the number. Those who handed it over didn't have a problem. Those that refused got cussed out before he refused service altogether. She claimed she actually had security footage of him going off when a customer, and some of the language he used was absolutely abhorrent. She planned on giving him a final warning over the incident that she prefers to work with and mentor junior staff instead of just kicking them to the curb. But the one thing she can't deal with is liars. Not realizing the footage came with audio, Tom tries to lie his way out of the predicament by claiming the disagreement was because the lady had tried to give him a fake $10 bill. That's like a pathological level of dishonesty, right? They're still insisting on the lies when confronted with overwhelming evidence to the contrary. I just remember apologizing for the intrusion and thanked her for setting me straight before I headed over to work to clock in. Tom was still expecting a reply at that point, but I just had no idea what to say to him. I wasn't even sure if I was ever going to talk to him again. I mean, that could have been me getting cussed out if I had the gall to turn them down. When I finished my shift, I got my phone out of my purse and I find that I had a grand total of 12 butt notifications, all with Tom's name attached. They started off all gentle at first. "Have a good shift. Text me when you finish," etc. But around 8 p.m., there was obviously a point where he learned of the interaction between me and his former manager, and he was not happy about that. Not one bit. "Oh, so you're just going to believe the exploitative employer over the person she's been taking advantage of? This is exactly what's wrong with the American labor market. Even the workers are bootlickers," was the general tone of his messages. I'm not even saying I entirely disagree, but the whole thing left such a bad taste in my mouth, but I wasn't interested in seeing him at all. When I got home from work, I blocked Tom's number, deleted my contact details, and figured that would be that. But oh, how wrong I was. A few days later, I'm working the evening shift, crouched down stocking the mini fridge. I finish up, close the fridge. Then when I stand and turn around, Tom stood at the register. I tried to be as warm and friendly as possible, asking how he's been and stuff. But I completely avoid the fact that we haven't spoken since his little text tirade. At first, I think I dodged a bullet, as he's perfectly civil and goes on to order a drink. But like right as I'm handing him his drink, he decides to make it super awkward. "So I guess you're pretty much done with me, He didn't say it in that particularly aggressive way, but it was loud and jarring enough to attract the attention of almost everyone in the store. I feel like I'm about to cringe out of existence, but somehow I maintain my corporal form and say in as lower a voice as possible, "This isn't the time or place. Please drop it." He just smiles, nods, and starts walking away. But instead of actually walking out of the door like I thought it was going to, he just takes a seat right in the middle of the store and proceeds to just stare at the register area in between baby sips of this coffee. And that's basically how it started. Tom would show up for coffee almost every time I was working, and every time he would just sit there for like an hour, staring me down whenever I was at the register. He was never rude or awkward about it, not after the initial incident anyway. So despite the fact that my boss had assured me that any funny business would result in a lifetime ban, he was reluctant to kick him out for being a little weird, as he phrased it. That got to be a kind of running joke about it, to everyone calling him Bicky Stalker, and I have to admit that one about upselling the Portuguese custard tarts until he was too fat to chase me, that one really didn't make me smile. But boy did that stop being funny. After the first time, he followed me home. After that, things got serious. I called the cops, got some advice from their fixated persons unit, and they actually paid Tom a visit to warn him off stalking me. But apparently he was only deterred for about a week, and what followed was a painfully slow escalation of intensity that culminated in the following. And that the 24 times had followed me up till that point, Tom had either stayed on the street corner and watched me walk into my building, or stood outside the building and looked up at the windows like he was trying to work out exactly which unit I was in. But on the day in question, I was so used to him keeping his distance that I didn't even notice that he was almost right behind me by the time I got to my door. Seeing him so close actually elicit the kind of squeal from me I'm definitely not proud of. But Jesus Christ, seeing him right there just about scared the poop out of me. I absolutely bowled it inside. Never been so grateful that the lock was operated by a key fob instead of an actual key. Tom just stayed at the door, banging on it and telling me to get my butt out there, that I had to be an adult and talk to him about it. Whatever it was, since he was banging on the door and screaming in the street, I was totally freaking out. And naturally, my first move is to call the cops. But I think he was banging so hard, acting like I was the one inside because the building I live in at the time looked exactly like all the other family homes on the block. To him, I could have quite easily been the only person living there only. That wasn't quite the case. I had the top floor of the house. Well, the bottom floor was occupied entirely by this Puerto Rican guy who worked night shifts. Keep in mind that this whole thing is going on in a Saturday afternoon, smack bang in the middle of this guy's sleeping time. So while I'm praying for the cops to show up in time, an unlikely savior is about to come to my rescue. So imagine you're me. Oh, you can hear us, Biggie. If you think that you can just punk guys like me and I'll face the consequences, you're dumber than you look. Bang, bang, bang. The out of nowhere and even deeper, louder voice starts booming over the first like, "Hey, are you crazy? I'm trying to sleep here." My neighbor from downstairs. His name actually turned out to be Luis, is wearing nothing but a pair of shorts, and he's screaming in Tom's face as he backs down the steps of our building. Tom starts saying something back to him, but Luis keeps shouting over him, telling him to get lost. Get it doesn't like he's interested in backing down just yet. Then again, out of nowhere, I hear Luis say, "Oh, you're gonna tase me, bro," before the confrontation gets physical. Everyone else in the streets is fixated on the fistfight that's now going down, but all I can focus on is what Luis said, "Tase me." Tom and brought a taser, presumably to use on me. Now by that point, because the cops were getting called about the fight on top of my stalking complaint, a marked patrol car rolls onto the scene. With a by now bloody Tom trying to walk away from the scene, the cops initially go for Luis, drawing their guns and demanding a show of hands. Buddy responds with, "Hey, I'm the victim here. This guy just tried to tase me." The cops and I watch as Tom starts to walk faster away from the scene, which obviously prompts the cops to chase him down and arrest him for carrying a concealed weapon or whatever they had in mind. Finally, my stalker was in police custody, only wouldn't catch charges for the actual stalking. He ended up going to jail for the one thing cops could stick to him, the contents of his backpack. On the one day that Tom had decided to act on this little fixation and move in to take me, or whatever, he had come with a pre-prepared kidnap kit, along with a few other choice items. According to the detective I spoke to after the fact, Tom had chosen to confront me that day while carrying duct tape, a length of electrical cord, a kind of retractable baton, and a box of 100 different contraceptives. For some reason, is that last part that particularly creeped me out, not so much their inclusion, but the sheer freaking number of them. At his trial for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, Tom's attorney argued the state was trying to wrongfully prosecute a man who had been unfortunate enough to be assaulted by an unhinged parolee, whilst caring nothing more about malicious than home supplies. The persecution had a different story. Not only had they obtained CCTV image of Tom showing up at my job on a total of 31 separate occasions over the course of 2 months, but a search of his home had turned up some extremely disturbing discoveries. What Tom had in his backpack that day was just a fraction of the kidnap kit that it assembled. He in all kinds of handcuffs, ankle cuffs, ring gags, and latex masks. But by far the most disturbing was the surgical tools and the Civaflorin canister face mask combo. Yeah, I had to ask what Civaflorin was too. And turns out, it's similar to chloroform that knocks you out, stuff that you put on a rag. He had tons of creepy stuff on his hard drive, including guides to kidnapping, hiding, and eventually breaking his prospective victims through a combination of brainwashing and beating. He also had a bunch of foreign language comic books that seemed to focus heavily on carnal torture, I suppose you could say. The prosecution just piled on all this evidence until it was quite clear to both the judge and jury that Tom was an extremely dangerous individual. I was terrified he'd escape justice via some loophole or something. Maybe he'd have rich parents who could pay for some smart lawyer. But no. Not even his clean rap sheet saved him from getting a solid 22-year sentence for conspiracy to commit kidnapping. As you can imagine, it was quite an ordeal, and I had to make a number of court appearances to confirm that I was one of the subjects of his many fixations. It was the most stressful experience of my life, without a shadow of a doubt, and a part of me wonders just how many of those 22 years he'll really end up doing. And when he does get out, will he really have changed? Or am I going to be walking on my driveway one day when I feel a hand on my shoulder? My goodness, turn around and see the face of a man who wants to finish what he started.
August in 2020, I moved in with my aunt and uncle to an insanely small rural town in California. When I first moved there, a friend of mine had made it a point to show me that someone could drive across the whole town within 5 minutes, and at the time I didn't realize how important that fact would become to the safety of me and my loved ones. My best friend Haley and I, her 17 and me being 18 years old at the time, were hanging out at a park that was about a 5 to 10 minute walk from where I lived. And I say park because there were a few tables and benches, and it was technically known as a town park, but in reality it was more a small grass clearing surrounded by woods and a dirt trail near the bank of a river. I had started to frequent this place after moving, walking down to the benches and trail to smoke or sit by the water. I had never really noticed any suspicious characters before this, even though I had plenty warned about a couple creepers that were in the area known for bothering young girls. Haley and I had been smoking for a bit unbothered in the clearing when we decided to finish our little trip with exploring the trail a little bit and just taking in all the scenery. We had been walking and talking for about 5 minutes when I started to get this tension in my shoulders, like that feeling you get when you know someone is looking at you. I looked behind us and there was a man on the trail with us. Granted, this path is pressed right against the side wall of a gated community, so seeing people going on walks and jogging was fairly common. I told my friend of the man's presence, but she had just written it off as me being anxious. But she had a good point that I tend to be a bit hyper-aware at times, but something about the man felt wrong in my gut. We kept walking, and I would periodically look back and keep tabs on the dark-haired, middle-aged man walking about 50 feet behind us. After not too long at all, the man started picking up pace behind us. Calm, casual walking became more of a speed walk, and I turned around completely and started walking backwards to try and communicate to this man that I was completely aware of his presence. He had moved toward the side of the trail, looking like he was about to walk through the brush down to the river. I felt a bit stupid for being so worried. Turning back around, I resumed walking forward, but glanced back one more time to be sure that he was gone. As I looked behind us for the last time, I saw the man in a full sprint, charging back onto the trail straight toward me and Haley. I grabbed her sleeve with one hand and pulled out my pocket knife with the other. I can't remember what I said to her, but we started sprinting down the trail as fast as we could. I had never gone far down this path and had no idea where it led. The man chasing us was blocking our way back to the clearing in the road. His footsteps on the dirt grew louder, getting closer. I let go of Haley's sleeve to pull out my phone and called my uncle while still running. I told him we were being followed on the trail at the park, but I couldn't give him an exact location. I had never gone much further than the entrance and didn't know where the trail led to. My uncle told me to stay on the phone and make as much noise as possible so he could find us. I let out the loudest, shrillest scream I could muster as we kept running, and finally we reached the end of the path where an old metal fence surrounded some trees and what looked like an abandoned house or shed. Nearby, we saw the back corner of the outer wall for the gated community, and in that split second it seemed like our best option. I yanked us off the dirt path and into the trees lining the cement wall. I yelled at Haley to climb as fast as she could, boosting her from the bottom so she could use a tree and the ledge to get over the top. I threw my pocket knife and phone over the wall and somehow scrambled up and over myself as fast as I could. I landed face first onto a neatly trimmed patch of grass inside the gated community, startling a man who had been calmly walking his dog. I became acutely aware of how strange we must have looked. Two panicked teenagers yelling and holding a knife. But the man seemed to realize that we were in trouble. He rushed over to ask if we needed help, and while Haley explained the situation, I got back to my phone with my uncle and told him that we had made it into the gated community. And not even a minute later, we heard my uncle shouting from the trail. He yelled threats at the man who had chased us, making it clear that he had a firearm and wasn't afraid to use it. The man with the dog led us to a small access gate along the wall and unlocked it so we could meet my uncle on the trail. My uncle told us that he had driven his car through the park and up to the trail entrance as fast as possible before running to find us. He hadn't seen anyone on his way in. After checking to make sure that we were okay, I retold what had happened in greater detail now that the panic was wearing off. My uncle escorted us back to his car, his firearm in plain sight, ready in case the man showed himself again. We didn't see him on the way back, and I haven't returned to that place since, but for a long time after, I was constantly paranoid that I was being followed whenever I left the house. We were never able to figure out who that man was, and I haven't seen him since that day. In 2016, I decided I was going to move out of my hometown and make it all by myself across the country. My entire extended family all lived in my hometown, and none of my cousins or any other family members had any desire to leave. I wanted to be the one who changed that for my family. Of course, they were upset, being that my family is extremely close, but it was time to experience this world outside of my own backyard. I moved from a small town in Idaho to a somewhat small town in Maine. I was so excited to start my life in Maine. I was told that the town that I was moving to had a small summer tourist boom, but most of the time it was quiet and scenic, which is exactly what I wanted. I visited a few months before the move and met a lot of locals who all seemed so lovely. The community was so friendly, and it appeared as if though everyone there just watched each other's backs. The time finally came, and I moved with my fiancée, Ricky. The move was mostly harmless, a few lost tempers, but ultimately it went smoothly, and by 6 p.m., we were inside our new home. Unfortunately, the blissful enjoyment of our new home didn't last very long. At some point in the middle of the night, I didn't see the time, we were awoken by a strange sound. It almost sounded like a door slamming. Ricky got out of bed and went to go see. When he returned to the bedroom several minutes later, he said nothing seemed strange or out of place. However, the time it took for him to check and come back seemed way too long. When I asked him what took so long, he told me that the front door was unlocked, which isn't like us, but he said that it was possible with all the excitement from the day that he may have left it unlocked. So, he spent a few minutes looking around the house just in case whatever we heard was an intruder. Thankfully, no intruders, whatever the sound was gone now. He proceeds to kiss me goodnight and told me not to worry about it, and we go to bed. That night was rough. I couldn't sleep at all. Call it women's intuition or call it whatever you want, but something deep down just didn't feel right. That morning we had our coffee and continued to decorate and set up our new home. It wasn't until about 1 p.m. that we finally got ready to leave the house, and on the front steps was a package with a note. And the note just said, "Welcome. Enjoy the house." Ricky grabbed the package and opened it up inside, and it was a drinking glass. Just a regular drinking glass. It looked old, but there was nothing special about it. He laughed and made some jokes about people in Maine being just weird or something, and I laughed, but mostly felt this certain sense of uneasiness. I just knew that something was wrong about this. After the drinking glass package, we went to the store and ran all our necessary errands. Moving is really exhausting. Sometimes you don't realize all the stuff you need and forget until you're all settled in. That night we had dinner, got the internet set up, and watched a movie together. I felt off and anxious the entire evening. We got into bed at around midnight, and shortly after midnight we heard 3 loud bangs. Neither one of us was asleep yet, as we had just got into bed a little while ago. Ricky made his way to the door slowly, and before he could answer the door, bang, bang, bang. 3 loud bangs reverberated through the house again. Ricky shouted from our side of the door, "Who is it?" And what I heard next surprised me. A very old woman shakily shouted, "Please, I need help. There's an intruder out here and I'm not safe." My fiancé responded, "Okay, just hang tight, I'm calling the police." The woman shrieked almost instantly, "No, please, let me in, they're coming." I stood in the doorway, clenching my sweater. Ricky turned to me, looking for my input, and I just couldn't speak. I just shrugged. If this woman truly was in danger, we were just leaving her for whatever may be out there. Ricky motioned for me to get into the closet that was right outside our bedroom and to call the police. I got into the closet right away and called the authorities. Once he heard me whispering to the dispatch, Ricky opened the door and some very old, frail woman came barreling inside. She started to yell at Ricky, "Shut the door right away! I saw them out there!" Ricky didn't say anything, much like me. He was trying to process what was even happening. The old woman said again, Who else is in the house?" Ricky looked at her and said, "It's just me in the house. Now, here, sit down, take a deep breath. Relax, I can call the police." The woman became frantic again and started to pace around the living room and said, "My husband is out there, please, you need to help him. You need to let him hide in here or they'll get him." Ricky looked sympathetic, but told the old woman, "Listen, I'm sorry, ma'am. If it's not safe out there, I'm going to call the police now. They'll be able to help." With the flip of a switch, the old woman stopped with the erratic behavior, and in a much deeper and almost sinister-sounding voice, she said, "Open the door now, or I'll drain the life out of you." Ricky was not amused. He looked at the old woman, pointed at the door, and said, "What? You get out right now." The old woman skipped to the door like a freaking child, and when she opened the door, 2 much younger and much larger men ran in and began to tackle my fiancé to the ground. I stayed hidden the best I could in the closet and watched the struggle from the crack in the door. I held my breath that the police would be there any second. I could see the men kicking Ricky, and I could hear Ricky coughing and struggling, all while the old woman cheered and cackled. I don't know exactly how long it was. It was probably only moments, but the police lights could be seen through the windows. All three intruders ran out the back door, as if they knew exactly where the door was. On the way out the door, the old woman grabbed the package with the glass and she yelled, "Enjoy the house, Ricky!" The fact that somehow she knew his name made me cry, even more than I already was, and by the time the cops got inside, the intruders were out the door and gone. Ricky got to his knees and struggled to get to his feet after the beating he received. We gave the police all the information we could think of, the random package with the note, which the woman took, so we didn't even have that in our possession. We told them that the intruders seemed to know the layout of the house well, and we were able to give the cops a mostly accurate description of the intruders, as they weren't wearing masks at all. The fact that I could see their faces and eyes made them so much scarier. The two men looked sort of clean-cut, both young, and they were bigger and muscular looking, and both had a little bit of scruff, but the neat kind of scruff. One dirty blondish and the other had dark hair. The one with the darker hair was balding, and the other man had his hair pulled into a bun. And the older woman was extremely frail and small looking, and she had this skin that looked as if though it were almost dripping off of her body. She had long, straight white hair, and from what I could see from my vantage point, no teeth, and I'm not sure about that last bit. The police were unable to catch these intruders, but that didn't matter to us. The next day we stayed in a hotel for a few nights and then moved back to Idaho. Being alone with no family during that ordeal nearly broke me, and then, more than ever, I needed my family. I still live in Idaho to this day, and I have no intentions of ever moving away after that nightmare. What's most frustrating is that I never did get my answers. I have no idea why we were targeted. I can see the events played out in my head as if it were yesterday, and it still makes me sick. The most frustrating and downright horrifying detail of the story is the details that my fiancé told me after we had already moved home to Idaho. Information he didn't tell the cops because he said it wouldn't have mattered anyway. That first night with the loud noise we had heard, Ricky said the door was unlocked. Well, that's true, but it was more than unlocked. The front door was wide open, and so was the back door. The door the intruders ran out of the second night. Whoever these monsters were, they were in my home the night before. I have not slept right since this ordeal, and I'm not sure that I'll ever sleep right again. This happened 4 years back. It was the middle of winter, and the night was unseasonably warm, without a hint of snow on the ground. I left my apartment around 8 p.m. to go for my daily walk. I worked nights and my schedule was screwed up, hence the 8 p.m. walk, figuring I would cross the bridge into the city nearby. For further context, I'm a very tall guy who's fairly athletic, and I was in my late 20s at the time. I'd rarely had a problem walking at night, and at the time I felt safe doing so. I put on my headphones and headed towards the bridge. The first 20 minutes were uneventful. I passed by old houses, a subpar Mexican restaurant, a really good Mexican restaurant, a sketchy gas station, some newly built upscale apartments, and finally, I was at the river, enjoying the view of the bright lights over the dark flowing water, not yet frozen. I crossed the bridge into the city and hit a crosswalk button at a four-way intersection, and then noticed someone standing on the corner opposite, the only other soul I'd seen outside that night. Seemingly, she was doing nothing, and I assumed that she was waiting for an Uber to come pick her up, since she didn't seem to be waiting for the light to change. The street, ordinarily busy during the daytime, was completely silent. The light changed, and I crossed, headed in her direction. As I neared her, I noticed that she would cast glances in my direction and then look away, almost sheepishly. And she did this multiple times, and I figured that she was maybe unnerved by me. And I sympathized, figuring that it must have made her uneasy, us being the only two people on a very dimly lit street. As I passed by, I took in her outfit, mostly because I thought she looked cold, and She wore a knitted hat with tassels, a sweater that looked too thin for the winter, tight jeans, and a little plastic children's backpack on her back. I thought that maybe she was in her teens at first, but upon closer inspection she appeared to be in her late 20s or 30s. She had short cropped, light brown hair and a pale complexion. She was skinny and was of average height. I was maybe a head taller than her, and I walked by and continued down the street. I passed by high-rise hotels on my right and left and made my way into a central park. During peak hours, this place would be packed with tourists and locals alike, but that day, at an odd hour with the pandemic in full swing, I felt like the only man in the city. I admired the brilliant display of lighted trees as I crossed through the center of the park. Then, figuring I was at a good halfway point in my journey, I made my way around an old marble and stone library back towards the bridge. As I turned the corner of the library back onto the street from which I'd come, I nearly collided with someone moving towards me. It was the same woman I'd seen not 10 minutes earlier. My noise-canceling headphones were still on, so I pulled down on one side and said something by way of apology. She said nothing in return. Instead, she stepped back from me and stood below a streetlight, not making eye contact. She stole tiny glances at me, that same tick that I'd noticed before, and I put my headphones back on and nodded goodnight and headed towards the nearest crosswalk. Reason told me that she must be headed in the direction I'd come from, since we'd nearly run into each other headed opposite ways, but some part of me whispered that she wasn't headed that way. And sure enough, when I turned to look, she was trailing closer behind me, her strides surprisingly long and energetic, and I found this odd that I continued to watch her out of the corner of my eye. Shortly after I reached the crosswalk, as I stood there waiting for the light to change, she caught up with me, passed me by, and stopped. A car went past, and as it did so, she squatted over her plastic bag a few meters from me, rifling frantically for something, looking up at me on occasion. I hit a button on my headphones, stopping my podcast so that I could hear her better. And what I found disturbing about the motion of her looking through her bag is that it struck me as fake, as though she were pretending for some reason. She was barely looking inside, and her careless motions struck me more like bad acting, and something about her motions, the way she kept looking at me, it all felt wrong. The light changed, and I began to walk quickly, but she was faster. She stood suddenly, darting past me towards the museum, swinging the half-open little pink backpack over her shoulder, and I watched her silhouette disappear into the darkness beyond the reach of the streetlights. I hoped that that was the end of that, and after a few beats of not seeing her, I let my guard fall a little, restarting my podcast. Beyond the museum was a patch of poorly lit sidewalk in front of a squat building with mirror-like windows. I wasn't far from the bridge now. As I made my way back there, I turned my head to look at the reflections of buildings and streetlights in the windows, and to my horror, a dark figure sprinted silently towards my reflection, dreamlike. I'm not sure why, maybe out of sheer confusion, but I turned to meet her as she hurtled towards me. Perhaps surprised by my sudden turn, she halted mere feet from me, staring. Her eyes were wide and looked frantic, wild, and she kept looking at my arms and then back at my face as though sizing me up. My accidental bluff had worked, and in the darkness, I suppose I must have looked more prepared to fight back than I felt. She gripped something small tightly in one hand, though she held it off to the side, and in the shadow of the building I couldn't see what it was. Seconds dragged as we stood there, staring at one another. Immobilized by fear and confusion, I waited for her to make some move, to attempt to use whatever object that she held in her hand. Just then, to my enormous relief, a car trundled slowly past. A bit of my strength returned, and over my blaring podcast I felt, more than heard, myself shouting at her, "What do you want?" And there was no reply. I slowly backed away from her, expecting her to move, and she just watched me, that same intense look on her face. I took another step back, and then another, and steadily backing away from her until I felt confident enough to turn and carefully walk away. As I reached a better lit area, I began to move faster, all the while keeping my eyes trained on her shadowy form. She stood there for some time, statuesque, then abruptly, having spontaneously abandoned whatever plan that she may have had for me, she turned from me and, without looking for traffic, she crossed the street with long strides and disappeared around the corner of a building. Something about the casual air of it disturbed me greatly. I kept my eyes trained behind me on my walk home, afraid that she would follow me. The bridge was well lit and I saw no signs of her. And knowing that this was the only way for her to follow me and keep up on foot, I breathed a sigh of relief. I saw no more cars headed from the city and no more pedestrians out walking. Nothing happened after that, I'm not sure why, but I didn't call the cops that night. I still regret not having called despite my roommates insisting that I do so. I just remember thinking that I wasn't sure what to say to the cops, that I hadn't really been attacked, that they wouldn't be able to find her anyway, and I made up excuses. I suppose I must have been in shock, in denial at having been nearly ambushed, especially by someone smaller than me, in my own city, so close to my apartment. And one of my roommates called the cops for me, and a cop drove through the area, but by that point, she was gone. This happened to me in Tempe, Arizona, not far from Mill Avenue where all the bars are at. I was out bar hopping with a group of friends one weekend, having a good time, and had gotten pretty wasted. I have this terrible habit of wandering off and getting lost when I drink, and this particular night I had managed to get myself in a very dumb situation. After wandering down streets for almost an hour, I started to realize that I was very lost, and to make things worse, my phone was out of battery. At some point, I decided that I would just walk back to my friend's house, which I knew was somewhere north of an area that we were bar hopping. Now, I should mention that I am severely incompetent when it comes to directions and navigating in a city, so I didn't realize that I was a solid 7 to 8 miles away from my friend's place. As I was stumbling confidently along the empty roads at 2 a.m., a sedan suddenly pulls off the road in front of me, aggressively, almost blocking my path. Somewhat startled, I look towards the driver's side and see a rather large and mean-looking black gentleman staring me down. In situations like this, most people have one of two reactions. They either become scared and defensive or angry and aggressive. I, on the other hand, am an insane person and was just drunk enough to have no sense of the danger that I might be in. And I proceeded to wave at the guy saying, "Hey man, what's good?" I'm not completely sure, but I think I was probably smiling too. I specifically remember the face that he made. It was sort of confused and conflicted, as if I were asking him what year it was. He paused for a second and asked me something, but I couldn't understand what he said. And I responded back, "Huh?" And he then asked me, "Where you going?" I told him I was trying to walk to my friend's place, but I have no idea where I am. After another pause, he told me to get in. Now, without thinking, I walked over to the passenger side and hopped in. Pretty dumb, right? Well, at the time, it seemed like a good idea. And once I got in, I was able to get a better look at the guy. He was covered in tattoos and was wearing your typical thug attire. I also noticed his arm was all bandaged. Oh, and he had a pistol clearly tucked into his shorts. And again, for some reason, none of this fazed me at the time. He asked me where my friend's place was, and I gave him directions. Now, I'm pretty sociable and talkative when I drink, so I immediately started chatting with the guy casually. I don't remember exactly what we talked about, but eventually he started telling me that he had just gotten out of the hospital after being treated for a gunshot wound on his arm, and his girl just broke up with him because of it. Apparently, she didn't like that he was in a gang and getting into gunfights. Go figure. He then told me that he was real pissed off about her and about getting shot, and he was driving around looking for someone to rob when he found me, and that he has served time for robbery in the past. At that point, my drunken brain started to connect the dots, and I thought about the roughly $200 that I had in my wallet at that very moment. But instead of freaking out, I just said something like, "Damn, man, that's rough." He also told me that he really wanted to be a rapper, and he was trying to get his music career started. I tried to be supportive, telling him to just go for it. About 10 to 15 minutes later, we pulled up at my friend's place. Now, this is when I should have just gotten out of the car and told the armed man thanks for the ride, but again, I'm an insane person and felt like I owed him one for taking me all the way there, so I asked if he wanted to come in and smoke some, and he said he was down. At this point, my friends had already been back for a while and were all wondering what had happened to me. And as you might expect, they were awfully surprised when I showed up with a strange black guy who I now knew was a gang member who had debated robbing me at gunpoint. What the dude did next sort of sketched everyone out, though. My buddy lives in a house with a few other people. His room is at the very end of the hallway, and that's where they all were listening to music. He also has a huge safe in his closet that is visible as soon as you walk in the room. I didn't realize it, but my new friend had brought his gun inside with him, and shortly after entering the room after everyone said what's up, he took his gun out of his waistband and put it down right on top of the safe in front of everyone. It seemed like a really odd thing to do, but it was a lot better than what he could have done. I feel like it was a sort of show of respect, like he wanted to show that he wasn't going to use it. Luckily, I do have super chill friends, so they acted cool and were about to roll up a blunt, so a few minutes later we all went back to smoke, leaving that gun in his room. The dude chilled with us for a while longer and actually seemed to get along with some of my friends who had a similar interest in music. He then picked up his gun off the safe and left without incident. Looking back, I realized that could have gone much, much worse, especially since my buddy had a lot of cash in that safe and could have easily robbed us at gunpoint at any time. And I like to think that although he was a criminal and a gang member, he was also just a guy going through a hard time, and a little kindness and marijuana prevented that night from going very, very bad.
My name's Linda Brown, and I've recently moved to this town. Due to my mom's influence, I've come to love shopping at Target. And the good thing about this place is that the store is just a few blocks away from my apartment. At least that's what I thought before that incident. I was thrilled to discover Target 5 minutes from my place, so I went there to buy some stuff for my new home. Shopping in my comfort is something I love, and that store had just that. The woman who worked as a cashier was amiable, making me a regular at that place. But then one day, she told me she was going on pregnancy leave, and another cashier would join the next day as her replacement. A week later, I saw a man in his late 20s instead of her. I can't say why, but something felt strange about it. And while it might have been my imagination, I was subconsciously hyper-aware of the new cashier. The way he looked at me while ringing my items felt uncomfortable too. It wasn't just then, but whenever I visited Target after that, he would stare at me weirdly, scanning me from head to toe, making me highly edgy. So I decided not to go there anymore and chose a different store to buy whatever I needed. One day, when I was walking back from shopping, I noticed him standing on the road I needed to pass by, smoking. I tried my best to ignore him while his gaze followed me, and as I walked past him, I couldn't help but notice him mouthing some vulgar word to me. A strange fear crept up to my skin, making it crawl, but I successfully managed to walk away. Unfortunately, it didn't stop there. As I headed home from work one evening, I spotted him standing by an alleyway. It was as if he had anticipated my arrival that time, sending chills down my spine. These weird coincidences kept repeating, which made me think he was stalking me. And the fact that he would always say some bad words to me was getting on my nerve too. So I reported this to the police. He did not get arrested since he had done nothing to harm me yet, but he did receive a restraining order. I thought it all would end there, so I loosened up a little. It was the weekend that day, so I was relaxing at home when Jude called me. She wanted me to visit the salon with her. More like threatened me into coming since I wanted to laze around all day. I wasn't even surprised that she spent 3 hours there and then dragged me to buy a dress for her upcoming date night. Jade, can I please go home? I'm tired from all the walking. I stopped in the middle of the road and whined like a kid. Fine, you can, but after getting some drinks. I was about to throw a tantrum at her words when she grabbed my hand and pulled me with her. I did go to the bar with her, but despite her forcefulness, I denied having a drink since I used to experience a nasty hangover whenever I had glasses. It was around 8:40 or 45 p.m. when I reached home only to find the apartment door unlocked. I was sure I locked it behind me when I headed for Jana's, which meant someone had broken in. 911, what's your emergency? The female operator asked on the other end. Someone has broken in my apartment, I said, giving her my address. She told me some officers would reach my place within 15 minutes and asked me to stay careful by then. I went inside with silent feet while carefully scanning the area, praying not to run into whoever was in there. That was when I heard footsteps coming from my bedroom and walked there sneakily, only to notice it was a mess. My clothes spread all over the floor while my undergarments were on the bed, along with a man who was lying over them. At first, I couldn't see his face, but when he turned around, it was him, that new cashier at Target. He had a nasty grin, and his eyes rolled back while touching himself. The scene horrified me so much that I ran outside my house. The thing he was doing was so nasty that it sent shivers down my marrow, and I started to feel nauseated. He probably heard me, for he ran after me and caught me, and before I could scream, he put a hand over my mouth, slapped across my face from the other, and started dragging me inside. I struggled and tried to get away from him, but he started punching me to keep me under control. A kick came to my gut as I blocked the door with all my force, since my senses told me that if he managed to take me inside, he would do something horrible and irreversible to me. Tears started to fall from my eyes as I received multiple kicks that followed the first one. He looked at me with that evil smile still on his face, with monstrous intent. Thanks to my quick thinking, I had already called 911 because that was when the officers arrived and pulled him away from me. I coughed up blood as I fell down to the floor. One of the officers came to my aid and asked if I wanted them to drop me at a hospital on their way to the police station, but I refused. The man glared at me till the end, but I was relieved he was arrested. I should have just stayed at Jenna's, I thought, as I leaned against the wall. That night, I spent wailing and taking painkillers to subside the pain. I threw the clothes away that were on the floor the following day, as they only haunt me. Even though I got my injuries checked at the hospital the next day, and they disappeared within a week, something continued hurting me. Nothing happened after that, but the fear of him being there continued to lurk inside my mind. The creepiness, the smile, and that horrible scene had imprinted on my brain, reminding me each day that someone else could be as twisted as him, just waiting to strike. No matter how hard I try, I cannot make him disappear. He is there when I'm working, and a male employee looks at me. He is there when I'm at a cafe buying my favorite coffee. I was never this paranoid person, but now that I'm suspicious of every person, whether they are friendly or rude, it makes me sick.
I'd recently moved to this new place in a small suburb, which was quite remote and about 2 hours away from other civilizations. My new neighbors' names were Greg, Eric, Alan, and Caroline. They each introduced themselves on the first day I moved there. My place wasn't all that big. It was a 2-story house, and for some reason, the master bedroom was on the first floor. The first few days I spent trying to find my way to places around the town and figuring out things, which was quite complicated despite the place only having not more than 20 people. It's a guess. Everyone seemed nice and friendly, always willing to help me out if I needed anything. Greg ran a supermarket, and when I mentioned I was looking for a job, he hired me as a cashier. I was surprised by the pay he offered me, even though his store was always almost empty. Only a fool would reject a golden offer. That was why I agreed without a second thought. About a month went by, and I don't know why I started having sleep problems. Probably because I was still not used to the whole new place yet. I tried whatever method I could find to try falling asleep, but none of them worked. With each passing day, it only got worse. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who deliberately stays up until late playing with my phone, gaming on PC, or chatting away with friends. No, I like my sleep, and the fact that neither medication nor chamomile tea was able to help me fall asleep seemed like a problem. That night, when I couldn't fall asleep and was looking out the window, I froze upon seeing something strange. Alan, with 2 mysterious figures, was carrying a corpse and was headed towards his house. The way I could tell she was a corpse was the state of the body, pale and on the verge of decaying. Every single one of them was almost dressed entirely in black, as if it was for the funeral. It would have been that they were about to bury the body. Perhaps she was a deceased family member he had brought back from the hospital. Either way, there seemed to be something weird and creepy about the entire thing. As I saw them disappear into Alan's home, I stood there for a few moments before closing the window and going to bed. Laying there, I couldn't stop thinking about what I witnessed, as multiple questions and suspicion arose from that. The next day, while I was working, curiosity got the better of me. When I saw Greg entering the store, I rushed to him to ask about Alan. However, my steps halted when I saw Alan entering the store behind him with some girl. Upon noticing me, he waved at me, and as he moved a bit further from the individual following him, revealing her face. A shiver ran down my spine as I recognized her face. She was the dead girl I saw last night. Unlike before, she didn't look pale. Instead, her skin was glowing and red. Who is she? I stuttered the question as I tried to control my legs from shaking, hiding the fear creeping up on me. Alan glanced at the girl and his lips curled with an affectionate smile as he said, "This is my wife, Julie." Greg approached her and started talking in a way that seemed he knew this, which was weird because a few days after I moved in, Alan asked for dating tips. I concluded I must have been mistaken and either saw wrong that night or fell asleep and had a nightmare. I introduced myself to Julie, despite being terrified of her, and tried to act normally. Not wanting to pry more into the matter, I returned to work. Since I was only able to get 3 hours of sleep, I was feeling exhausted as hell. Greg told me he had to be somewhere and asked to close the store 2 hours before its closing time. The way he left in such a hurry made me wonder where he might be headed. Anyway, once I closed the door, I returned to my house, which was within walking distance from the store. Once I reached home, I took a sleeping pill and gulped it in one go. The pills were my last resort after everything. Because I was so tired due to lack of sleep, I couldn't go on like that. That night, I was awakened by uncontrollable thirst. I got up from bed and headed to the kitchen for some water. After drinking and returning to bed, I realized I couldn't fall back asleep. As I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, I was reminded of the events from the previous night, and I got up and randomly walked to the window. However, as I looked outside, my eyes grew wide in terror. Just like Alan, Greg, too, was in black attire, accompanied by two people carrying a dead body. Even after they disappeared inside his house, I couldn't stop my racing heart and the feeling of suffocating fear taking hold of my body. I was about to close the window when I noticed Caroline, who instead of a still body was carrying a skeleton. The skeleton was wearing a newly bought suit, which was even more spine-chilling. For the rest of the night, I twisted and turned in my bed. When the ray of sunlight entered my room through the glass window, I got up and rushed outside. As I stood outside staring at each house, one by one, of my neighbors, I couldn't help but feel panicked. That was when I saw Caroline's house door open, and a blonde man came out wearing the same outfit as the skeleton I saw. He grabbed the newspaper before he raised his head and met my eyes. Then he smiled and waved at me as if we knew each other. I grabbed my hair and pulled it in frustration and fear as I saw him leave. That was when I saw Greg heading out in sports attire with a gorgeous woman. Yes, you guessed right, she too was a corpse the night before. I felt my head spinning as I turned around and headed inside my house. There was something wrong with this town, and I didn't want to endanger myself by staying a minute longer. With the help of some connections, I managed to get a temporary place where I could move to before finding a permanent place. So I called a moving truck and we started loading my stuff in there. Before I could get in the truck and leave, Eric approached me. I ignored his warning and started the truck. However, as I was about to cross the border, I remembered another truck driving at full speed in my direction. I tried to let it pass, but instead, it crashed right into me. There's no memory of what happened next, for I blacked out instantly. But when I woke up, I was at my new home with none other than my beloved wife, Christina.
My name's Abigail, and I turned 17 just yesterday. Since my father died, I've met many unfortunate incidents and traumas due to my drunkard mom's negligence. But having my brother Ethan there in that adversity through thick and thin eased some of the troubles. Mom never cared about us. She never even bothered to ask if we had eaten for the day or not. It was like we didn't matter to her, and she was the only one tormented by Dad's death. I don't remember clearly when and how we grew up like this, but before I knew it, I turned 17 and was asking my brother to give me the allowance money for the week. Mom stopped giving us money at some point, and Ethan started working at petty part-time jobs. Fortunately, she still provided us with education and hasn't kicked us out yet. Guess she did not forget that we came out of her womb. Her cold behaviors used to hurt us whenever we saw other kids receiving warmth from their mothers, but we've learned to ignore it nonetheless. I wasn't even surprised when she didn't remember my birthday this year either, but some of my friends seemed to enjoy making fun of my mom's ignorance toward us, so I was a bit annoyed. Ethan prepared a little birthday dinner just for the two of us at my favorite restaurant. I ordered all my favorite dishes, and everything was going fun. Despite knowing that my brother might have used up most of his savings to bring me to this fancy place for my birthday, I truly loved it, oblivious to the threat lurking around us. I excused myself for a bit to use the restroom, and as I was walking past a few other tables, I couldn't help but turn as I felt someone's persistent stare stinging my back, only to notice two men looking in my direction. It felt awkward and creepy, so I turned back and continued to walk to the restroom. As I was leaving the restroom area, I noticed the same men standing outside the men's room, and since I had to pass through that, I could not avoid them. I hesitated for a few seconds, but then I tried my best to put on a poker face and walked past them like a scalded cat. It was a relief that they didn't do anything, but as I walked back to my table, I could still feel their gaze on my back. Ethan smiled as he saw me coming in his direction, and as I reached there, he asked, "Is there anything else you'd like to eat?" His warmth and care always melt my worry away. So I smiled back and shook my head no. I think we should go home now. He looked at me with a concerned expression while asking, "Why? Did you not like it?" "No, brother, don't get me wrong. Everything was amazing. I enjoyed it, but don't you think it's getting late?" He looked at his wristwatch as I said that, and I knew the only reason he wanted to stay longer was to avoid Mom on such a joyful occasion. But since I felt uneasy staying at this place any longer, I did not take no for an answer. "Fine, but let's stop for ice cream on the way home," he said as he called the waiter over for the check. I swear at times like this, I feel like he's the younger sibling and not me. I still love him to death. After paying, we exited the restaurant and walked toward the subway station. But for some reason, I was still having the feeling of being watched. I turned around, and there was no one, so I thought I was mistaken. "Abe, I think someone's following us." When Ethan said that, the faces of those two men flashed in my mind, making me tremble at the thought that if they were to do anything, none of us had the strength to fight back, since it wasn't just me whose body was fragile. I looked at Ethan as he squeezed my hands, trying to assure me nothing wrong could happen. But as we took a few steps further, a car stopped before us, and we were pulled inside. "Kevin, you idiot, why did you grab the boy when we only needed the girl?" One of those men shouted at the other as they tied us while we struggled forcefully. "But brother, who would bring us the ransom money if we let go of the boy?" The other one replied. "Forget it. Let's go." They tied us to the back seat and started driving the car. "Now, you shithead, if you don't want to die, you would give us the money we want. Understand?" He pointed a gun at Ethan while saying that, and he shook his head vigorously. I could tell he was just as frightened as I was. They drove somewhere for 2 hours when one of them said he needed to pee. The other one looked annoyed, but asked him to hold it till they reached the travel stop. My mind was in a haze, and I couldn't think straight as I continued to panic. And even in that situation, I knew I was pale as death. After about half an hour, we reached a love stop where they parked the car outside. They took out the gun and held it behind our waists, as one of them said, "Don't even think about trying to act over smart while you're here, if you don't want the girl to die, that is." Ethan again nodded nervously before asking, "Can I at least use the restroom?" The man looked at him suspiciously and said, "Fine, but give me everything you have with you." The other man checked his pockets and took his wallet, watch, and phone. We then headed inside, and they somehow got in with their guns without anyone noticing it. Amidst being terrified, I continued to hope for someone to see us and we could get away from them. But I don't think luck was on our side. The bossy one led me to the Del Taco and headed to the last corner seat to wait for Ethan and the other man. And as we sat there, he continued to scan me from head to toe. I could feel the lust dripping from his teeth, making me shiver at the thought of him trying something with me. About 15 minutes later, the two of them returned. "Took you long enough. If we get caught, I will shoot you too," the man sitting with me said while gritting his teeth in annoyance. "It's not my fault, brother. He was taking a crap in there," he said as they sat on the table next to us, still sticking to our sides. That was when I noticed a man entering the Del Taco. He ordered something, then sat at a distance of 4 seats from us. Those men didn't want to cause suspicions, so they tried to put up an act of looking at the menu, and a few minutes later, I felt the man looking in our direction. "I think he's getting suspicious of us. Let's go now," one of the men said, signaling us to get up. My wishes for the man to stop us went in vain as I noticed no one following us. I didn't blame him. He must have thought we all were together like a friend group or something. We were forced back inside the car, and this time they made me sit in the front with that man who was eyeing me like a hungry hyena, while Ethan was in the back seat at the gunpoint of the other man. I knew that even if either of us tried to fight back or struggle, they would be much quicker than us. So it was better than we do as they say until we get a chance to escape. And Ethan must be thinking the same. The only problem was that while I knew they wanted money, I had no idea what they planned to do with us and how they thought of getting it. If they gave Mom an anonymous call, she would tell them to do whatever they wanted with us instead of giving them the money. While I was thinking all this, the car stopped suddenly in the middle of nowhere. I turned to look at the man sitting next to me, but judging by his irritated expression, the engine must have turned off on its own. The man asked the Kevin guy to go and check what was going on, and as they went to check, he put his hand on my inner thigh with a disgusting grin on his face. I wanted to scream, but I was scared they might kill Ethan, so I continued to look ahead as tears formed in my eyes and started falling off on their own. His hands proceeded further up when a muffling sound made me flinch at the thought of something happening to Ethan. I pushed the guy with all my might, opened the car door, and ran outside to see. My sudden act took aback the guy, but he instantly got it together and ran after me, only to find me frozen at the sight of his fellow's body lying on the ground, while Ethan was nowhere to be seen. I didn't want to, but I still hesitantly turned to see the enraged look on that man's face as he stared at his brother's corpse. My mind kept telling me to run, so I ran, but he grabbed my hair in a matter of minutes. He pinned me down on the ground and ripped the lower hem of my dress. But before he could do anything else, I saw Ethan sneaking up on him and hitting his head with the bloody wrench he had. The man didn't seem to be fazed by that hit, but as he was about to turn, a couple of hits followed the first one, making him fall to the ground. I had never seen such a ghastly look on my brother's face as I saw blood splattering on his face and body while he punctured the man's head. He looked more frightening than any monster or devil I had ever imagined, making me shudder with horror. Even after the man died, he continued to hit him, which was now shifted from his head to his stomach. He repeatedly screamed as he tore open his guts, "You dare touch my baby sister with your filthy hands." When finally done, he stepped back in horror as he realized his ruthless act. He stopped near the car tire, and it was as if his legs gave up when he squatted down with that cold, terrifying look on his face. I stared at the bodies of the two men. For some reason, my mind was at ease that they couldn't do anything terrible. But all the same, I was scared to death by the consequences of these murders. That was when I noticed the truck that had stopped at a distance, and I could tell it was the same man we saw at the travel stop. I couldn't help but feel bitter by looking at him, thinking that if he had helped us back then, nothing would have happened, despite knowing nothing was his fault. Ethan noticed me looking at him and followed my gaze, but the man's face turned pale as he saw my brother. He started his truck and drove away. I didn't want anyone else to notice us, so I got up and started dragging bodies to put them inside the car before anyone else showed up. Luckily, I found some water bottles inside their vehicle and a spare set of clothes, so I tried my best to wash off the blood on Ethan's body while he continued looking at me in a daze. I asked him to change while I thought of something to cover this up. Noticing the trail of leaked fuel on the road, I remembered I saw one of them smoking, so I searched for a lighter inside the car and found it. After setting the car on fire, we didn't look back and continued walking, hoping to hitchhike. We knew we would get caught eventually, and if any of the working security cameras captured us in the act, we would indeed get arrested. So once we reached home, we planned to grab our things and run away somewhere else. That is, if we don't get caught before then.
My friend and I decided to go on a late-night drive to find this creepy cemetery one night. Great start to a story, I know, but we were bored and in a small town with nothing else to do. After close to 40 minutes of driving, we got to the state park. Now, typically, parks are closed after dark, but these roads were still public access, so they weren't off limits to general drivers. However, we were the only cars on the road at this point, and it was isolated, we thought. The lanes were surrounded by thick trees, and it was dark. No streetlight dark. We're on a narrow dirt lane looking for this cemetery, but we drive by it, unknowingly. The area we were driving through was kind of like a square of roads with only one way in and out. We get to the crossroads, where the road we are on goes straight through, or you can continue back through by a left-only turn. Next to the ditch across the road from us, we see a dark green sedan pulled into the brush. No lights on, no people around it, not an accident from all we could tell. Whatever, kind of weird, but we slowly turned left and began to loop back around looking for the small rows of old headstones again. As we get back around the intersection about 5 minutes later, the green sedan is still pulled off in the bushes. But now, it's not the only vehicle there. There's a big pickup truck, idling in the dark across from us, blocking the straightaway. Now, it had to have come from the other direction, since no other cars passed us or were in front of us or behind us. That was the way we had planned to go, to leave the park, since we hadn't found what we were looking for, but we couldn't pass through. This truck was in the middle of the road, taking up all the space on either side. At first, we were thinking, this guy's pal probably got his car stuck and called for help. Then this truck guy turns on his headlights, his high beams, and starts revving his engine hard. My friend and I exchange looks, like wondering who's overcompensating for something, and when we turn back, trying to see through the blinding light, we see a silhouette of a big, bulky man. He's standing in front of the truck, hands on his hips, just standing there. We aren't a car's length and a half away from this guy, and there's nowhere to go but left, which we know just leads us back around to the same place. We sit staring at each other for a few moments, trying to decide what to do. My friend starts pulling the car forward at a snail pace, trying to keep as much distance between us and this truck as possible, and we make the left turn. He's just standing there, not moving, looking in our direction. We weren't scared yet, really, but I'm a bit paranoid generally, so I was waiting for him to lunge at the car, throw something at us or something. I don't know, it just really felt off. After we turn, I check the rear view and see the guy holding something as he takes a few steps behind our car in the outline of the light. It's long, barrel-shaped and threatening looking. We peel out of there now, wanting to put distance between us, but forgetting we are stuck in this square of roads. When we get back to about halfway, we begin to see the start of the straightaway in the truck, whose headlights we can still see. We pull off to the side of the road, trying to figure out how we can exactly get out of this situation. I look out the window and see that we are sitting right next to the cemetery we had been looking for, but we are both too freaked to get out now, and we laugh at the irony for a second. Then we see headlights coming from behind us. It's the guy, and it gets closer. We see it's a white SUV, and it slows next to our car. The window rolls down, and it's a car full of guys our age. "What are you guys up to out here?" the driver says. "We're just here for a drive." And they say some stuff out of earshot. My friends and I don't have a strong, menacing aura, so we hoped we could just send some chill vibes and have them leave us off the hook for whatever was going on. Were they with the truck guy? Because this wasn't truck guy, but was all too weird. We asked if they'd seen a truck ahead, where they had to have driven in, but they said that they hadn't. When we looked back, we noticed the lights from the oncoming direction were gone. They laugh and pull away slowly, telling us to have a good night, and we pull back onto the road and take off for the exit, only looking out the windows long enough to notice that only the sedan was still there. Sorry, buddy. Hope your car's alright. We made it back to his parents' place without further incident and told them about the encounter, but we couldn't explain what had happened really. It still kind of sounds stupid when I write it out, but something was going on.
Isn't it fun going camping with your friends? The sheer joy of being surrounded by the twinkling stars, indulging in fun-filled activities, exchanging secrets, and narrating spine-chilling tales while gathered around a blazing campfire is unparalleled, right? However, what if all this takes a turn for the worse? What if your much-awaited outdoor excursion turns into a living nightmare? Allow me to recount my harrowing experience, where a camping trip with my friends transformed into a spine-tingling ordeal. 7 years ago, as we were cruising down the road in the convertible, Jack suddenly burst out laughing and drew our attention. "Hey, did you see that? Quan just swallowed a bug," he said, still laughing as if he had just delivered the best joke ever, while we all gave him a disapproving look. In response, Quan threw his backpack at Jack in annoyance, making him groan, while he said, "Hey, that's because of the speed of the convertible, you bastard," which made the rest of us laugh. "Why are you so offended? Don't you guys eat bugs for breakfast or something?" He jeered, thinking he was funny, which was only annoying. But Quan wasn't one to back down, and he responded with a sharp retort, "At least our parents are at the breakfast table, unlike yours." "Stop it, you guys. And Jack, you need to stop throwing insults as a joke." It was clear that Jack's sense of humor had gone too far, so I scolded him for his behavior. "Hey, men joke like that among each other. You're a girl, so you don't know," he said, pouting, feeling insulted by my actions. Henry, who had been quiet the whole time, finally spoke up. "I'm also a man, so how come I don't know about such jokes?" he asked, trying to diffuse the tension and lighten the mood. But Jack was already sulking and pouting, claiming that he was joking and we were being mean to him. We all knew his excuses were invalid, and we couldn't help but laugh while he glared at the road ahead with furrowed brows. Although we knew that Jack's intentions were not to cause harm and that he was trying to be funny, his jokes often crossed the line and were hurtful. We have all been victims of his rude sense of humor, but at the same time, he has had our backs whenever we needed him. So despite his weird personality, we genuinely cared about him. The 4 of us were going on a camping trip. There were supposed to be 5, but Claire canceled at the last minute, leaving me all alone with these goofs. Henry was the only person who seemed a bit reliable, not because he was my boyfriend, maybe a little because of that, but mostly because he acted more maturely than others when he needed to. We reached the campsite around 5 in the evening and set up our tents. Nobody else was around in that area except for us, which was fine since we would probably be louder than a truck horn. "So, who got the booze?" Jack asked, glancing in the direction of Quan. He pointed toward the car, and the 2 of them went to the car with arms locked to bring out the rest of the supplies. I could never understand these guys. Nearly an hour ago, they were like 2 negatively charged objects, but now they acted like long-lost brothers who had never quarreled. Releasing a deep sigh, I began to take the food out of my bag. My eyes met Henry, who seemed to be staring at me. "What?" I asked, which made him look away with the embarrassment of being caught. "Nothing," he replied, scratching the back of his neck. I dropped whatever I was doing, walked to him, and looked into his eyes as I asked, "Tell me." "You are just so beautiful that I can't help myself." I smiled while blushing to my ears at his words. You're so cute. I placed a peck on his lips as I wrapped my hands around his neck, making him pull me and deepen the kiss. I loved my dork. Gross, you two. Get a room. We're here for fun, not puke. I rolled my eyes at Kwan's voice and turned to see them laughing while giving each other high fives. Shut up, idiot, I said while grabbing a matchstick to start a campfire. When another attempt to light the fire failed, Jack laughed as he remarked, "Are you sure you know how to make a bonfire?" I glared at him in frustration while he playfully laughed, taking a sip from his beer can. Henry came forward to help me, but the fire wasn't starting. That was when I noticed an eerie, thick white fog spreading in our surroundings and swallowing Jack. We heard his scream from a distance, sending chills down our spines. We started calling for him, but he didn't respond. When we were about to go inside the fog to look for him, an old man emerged. He was wearing all white, had a long white beard, and his eyes were closed. He was giving off an ominous vibe. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine when a part of his beard grew longer and grabbed Henry by his throat. And before I could blink, it pulled him in, and I heard a snap, which made me scream in terror. The man opened his eyes, which were white without any pupil or iris, and his mouth wider than a shark, before putting Henry's head in it, while the beard consumed the rest of the body. He then started crunching his head. The gruesome sight made me shudder in horror, making me so sick that I was ready to throw up when Kwan grabbed my hand and started running. I was so horrified that I couldn't process what was happening, and that was when I felt Kwan's hand being pulled away from me. I turned to see a white beard wrapped around him. I didn't want to let him go too. So I grabbed his hands even tighter and started pulling, but instead, I was the one being pulled toward the man. I saw a single tear fall from his eyes as Kwan pulled away his hand to let me escape. I couldn't help but scream his name as I saw him being consumed before I started running. I kept running and running without looking back until I found the highway. He didn't follow me for some reason, and I don't remember how, but I somehow managed to get to a police station and report everything. They seemed not to believe me, but they still assured me they would look for my friends. After getting to my apartment, I felt sick and couldn't eat or sleep for days. I even threw up multiple times. When I finally managed to sleep, I found myself getting chased by the same old man whose mouth was open, and he was this close to catching me when I woke up panting, covered in sweat. The police never found my friends, and after what happened to them, I know they never will. But despite being able to escape it that night, I'm still getting chased by him every time I close my eyes.
Growing up, my favorite thing in the world was going fishing with my two older brothers. We lived in a very rural area and would often hike out into the woods to go to various creeks to go fishing. We never really caught anything big in the creeks, but it wasn't as much about what we caught as much as it was about spending time with your brothers fishing. Stereotypically, we always got up way early in the morning on fishing day. We would begin hiking out to whichever creek we were going to and would watch the sun as it stole across the sky. It would be fully light outside as we got to where we were headed to. The scariest thing to ever happen on a fishing trip, of course, happened the first time that we had gotten to a new creek. We had set out that morning, determined to go further into the hills than we normally did. We passed by one or two of our regular fishing spots and kept going deeper and deeper into the woods. We found an absolutely amazing spot. It was thickly wooded, but the creek was huge. It was beautiful, and even had a fallen tree stretched out over it. After we determined that it was sturdy enough, the three of us made our way over to the other side of the creek. We sat our stuff out and began to fish. The day wore on, and we weren't really catching anything. The fishing got boring after a bit, so we decided to do something we normally didn't do. Like I said, the creek was huge and it was quite deep too, so we decided to put aside our fishing poles and go swimming in the creek. I really don't know how long we had been swimming when I noticed that our middle brother stopped doing anything and began staring off in the woods. Our oldest brother asked him what was wrong, and he just motioned to the woods. "There's someone out in the woods, watching us," he said. My first thought was that some pervert was out there watching us, but when I followed my brother's finger pointing out towards the woods, those thoughts quickly evaporated. Standing off in the trees was a huge man. It wasn't too dark that we couldn't make out some of his features. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, which struck me as odd as it was pretty warm out. He had a baseball cap on his head that was sitting low over his face. But the most striking feature he had was that he was holding what looked to be a rifle or shotgun in his hand. We weren't sure what to do. Going into the woods, we knew that we were trespassing. We never actually knew whose property we were on, but we did know that the places that we hiked and fished on didn't belong to us. Except up until this point, we had never gotten caught before. Both of us younger boys looked at our brother for instruction as to what to do. He seemed just as worried as we did, though, and didn't give us any direction. He just kept looking at the man standing there and watched. My brother suggested we try and get ourselves over to our stuff, take it, and leave. However, this was daunting because that was the side of the creek the guy was on. We slowly made our way over to our things. However, before we got to shore, an old hag came running out of the woods, shrieking like a freaking banshee. I got startled and fell back into the water, struggling until my middle brother pulled me back up again. The old nasty woman actually ran over to our things, our poles, and our clothes. She started grabbing the things and screaming, "Mine, mine, mine, mine!" She was gathering all of our things in her arms, dropping a few of them when she had too much in her arms. "Hey, stop that!" my oldest brother yelled, and began to try and move faster to the shore. My middle brother reached out and put his hand on his shoulder and pointed back to the big guy in the woods. When we moved back towards the shore, he began moving closer, and he held the gun up as he walked. "Holy shit!" I distinctly remember yelling. "We're sorry we trespassed on your property," my middle brother shouted, but they didn't pay any attention to us. "He's not gonna shoot us," my oldest brother said, and began moving towards the old hag to get his things. As he did, though, the old woman saw him, and she took a fillet knife out of her pocket and started waving it at my brother. "I'll cut you!" she screamed at him, her arms still overflowing with our things. By now the big hillbilly was by the shore of the creek, and he had the shotgun cocked and was pointing it at my oldest brother. He, of course, stopped in his tracks. It was a tense moment as we stood cold in the water with this guy pointing his gun right in our faces. Once the woman had gathered up our clothes and fishing gear in her hands, the guy said one thing to us: "Get." We didn't have to be told twice. All three of us swam to the other side of the creek, got out of the water, and got out of there. It sucks because we had to walk through the woods in nothing but soaked shorts. We didn't even have shoes, and the twigs and rocks and leaves hurt our feet, but we were too scared to even consider going back. We fortunately did not get chewed out for losing our stuff. Our dad told us that there are some messed up people out in the woods, and we had to be careful. It was a long time, though, before we were brave enough to go fishing again. Born in Alberta, Canada in the late 1970s, a young Mark Twitchell dreamed of directing big-budget Hollywood blockbusters. It's only fitting that Mark was born around the same time as the first Star Wars movie was released, as the series became a lifelong passion of his. So much so that in 2007, he actually directed a feature-length fan fiction movie set in the Star Wars universe named Secrets of the Rebellion. The film depicts a series of events that occur just a few days prior to those of the original film, and also happens to include a cameo from Boba Fett actor Jeremy Bulloch. Secrets of the Rebellion was shot in full but remains in post-production and is unlikely to ever see the light of day. The same goes for another short film that Mark tried to make named House of Cards, a horror movie filmed entirely in an Edmonton garage he'd rented. Yet Mark's films are forever doomed to remain in the editing phase because, aside from filmmaking, Mark seemed to foster another passion. It was one that was not only considerably more sinister, but one that would result in him being sentenced to a minimum of 25 years in prison. About the same time that Mark was filming a short horror movie, a 38-year-old factory worker named Johnny Altinger was on top of the world. Having recently dipped his toe back into the dating pool, he was delighted to inform his colleagues that he'd actually managed to bag a date with a woman he'd met on Plenty of Fish. Given that Johnny believed he was well past his sell-by date, we can understand how excited he might be, and how eagerly he might agree to meet a woman he'd only just met online. Johnny's coworkers were happy for him and wished him luck with his budding romance, so much so that when he failed to show up for work one day, and they received an email from his account telling them that he and his date had eloped to Costa Rica, they were incredibly understanding. Sure, it'd take some extra work to cover his shifts, but love is love, and Johnny deserved happiness. Needless to say, Johnny's coworkers were heartbroken when they then received a resignation letter from him via email. They'd missed him, but it sounded like he'd been caught up in something of a whirlwind romance. It was impossible not to be happy for him. The only matter that remained was getting Johnny's forwarding address so his employers could mail his final paycheck to him. But bizarrely, Johnny didn't return their emails, and the likelihood of him being content to miss out on a hefty sum of money seemed extremely slim. Finally, after weeks of waiting and worrying, a handful of Johnny's friends broke into his apartment. They harbored a great deal of suspicion regarding their friend's little Costa Rican vacation and weren't prepared to just sit back and wait for the cops to do something. Yet the break-in only worried them even further when they found Johnny's travel luggage and passport still in his home. To them, it still wasn't entirely clear what was happening yet, but they knew it certainly couldn't be good. Johnny's friends went straight to the Edmonton Police Service with their foreboding collection of evidence, and it wasn't long before a homicide investigation was officially launched. By chance, one of the individuals interviewed in relation to Johnny's disappearance was none other than our wannabe Spielberg, Mark Twitchell. It appeared that Johnny had sold his car to Mark at some point in the previous weeks, and this might prove a rather fruitful lead. Mark might well be able to provide them with an insight into Johnny's state of mind, perhaps even recall something Johnny said that might point them in the right direction. The police had no reason to believe that Twitchell was a potential suspect, but they also knew that there was no way Johnny was in Costa Rica, unless he had smuggled himself across the border. So, when Mark mentioned that Johnny had expressed a desire to take a vacation, the police immediately became suspicious. The inclusion of such an obviously false assertion was enough for the police to arrest Mark Twitchell on Halloween of 2008 as a suspect in the murder of Johnny Altinger. As part of their investigation of Twitchell's involvement in the disappearance, police seized and analyzed all of his electronic devices. They hoped to find an incriminating text message, a sinister search history, anything to prove it was Mark who was guilty of the murder. The chances of finding anything were slim, and even then, proving its implications would be another task entirely. So, we can only imagine the pure shock of law enforcement officials when they found a document on Mark's computer that was simply titled Serial Killer Confessions. The opening passage of Serial Killer Confessions read as follows. This story is based on true events. The names and events were altered slightly to protect the guilty. This is the story of my progression into becoming a serial killer. The document went on to present an account of its narrator's planning, failed first attempt, and successful second attempt to lure a man to his garage and murder him, with fake online dating profiles used as bait. It also described the process of dismembering the body and attempts to dispose of the remains. It was a thinly veiled attempt to fictionalize what had evidently been a very real murder, as the account was so horrifyingly detailed that it was quite obviously a retelling of Mark's own experiences of murdering Johnny. Slowly, the truth became horrifyingly clear. Johnny lost his life so that Mark might be able to author a better true crime story. At his trial, Mark attempted to fabricate the idea that he had murdered Johnny in self-defense, and that the serial killer confession document he had authored was merely a coincidence. Yet, he was hard-pressed to explain another document that law enforcement had recovered from his laptop, one which was titled A Profile of a Psychopath. Despite his own insistence to the contrary, the prosecution argued that it was Mark's attempt to deeply analyze his own bizarre behavior and personality. This second document also detailed how, in the days leading up to Johnny's disappearance, Mark had purchased knives, plastic sheeting, saw blades, and a meat cleaver, all in preparation for creating what was described as a kill room in the rented garage. But perhaps the most damning piece of evidence the jury heard was the plot of Mark's short horror movie, House of Cards. They were told that the movie centered around an unfaithful husband, one that was lured to a discreet location under the pretense he was meeting a woman from a dating website. However, once he arrived, he was attacked and killed by a masked man as punishment for his infidelities. Mark hadn't just killed a man so he could write about the process more accurately. He had staged a grim reenactment of his own short film. Once these details emerged, the police were contacted by a man named Gilles Tétrault, a computer company contractor who seemed desperate to talk to them regarding the Mark Twitchell trial. Gilles told investigating officers that he too had been lured to a secluded location under the pretense of meeting a young man named Sheena, whom he'd been flirting with online for the past several days. But when he arrived, he found himself ambushed by a man in a hocket mask who attempted to subdue him with a stun baton. After a violent struggle, Gilles managed to escape, but did not report the attack to police out of sheer embarrassment. It was a clear replication of Mark's modus operandi, and suddenly, it became clear that Gilles was the one Mark mentioned in the first court document, a man the media dubbed the one who got away. As the trial progressed, the prosecution slowly pieced together a picture of who Mark Twitchell really was, a violent, deranged psychopath who masqueraded as a filmmaker, using the art form to recreate violent fantasies that he would later delight in making a reality. The jury had no problem finding him guilty of first-degree murder, and in April of 2011, Mark was given the maximum sentence by Canadian law, life in prison with no parole eligibility for a minimum of 25 years. But even after his imprisonment, grim details of Mark's fascination with murder and dismemberment continued to reach the ears of the public. Apparently, Mark's favorite TV show was Dexter, a series that chronicled the life of Dexter Morgan, a man with homicidal tendencies living a double life. He works as a forensic technician for the police department during the day, but after dark, he continues his work as one of Miami's most prolific serial killers. In May 2013, it was reported that Twitchell had purchased a television for his prison cell. Twitchell stated that he had caught up on every Dexter episode that he missed since he was arrested and convicted of first-degree murder. Word of Mark's love for the show was met with such revulsion by those that heard it that Dexter's lead actor, Michael C. Hall, was confronted with the news on a live radio show up in Canada. I would hope the people's appreciation was more than some sort of fetishization with the kill scenes, he said. And I wouldn't stop making Dexter because someone like Mark Twitchell was fascinated by it only in that way. I try to tell myself that their fixated nature would have done it one way or the other, but it seems that Dexter had something to do with it. It's genuinely horrifying. Perhaps Michael C. Hall is correct. Perhaps Mark Twitchell had fostered a fascination with the macabre, and that had long predated his love of Dexter, and was bound to hurt someone sooner or later. But there's also little doubt that the violent imagery presented in shows like Dexter have a very particular effect on some people. They act as triggers, making people like Mark want to turn their darkest fantasies into violent, permanent realities. Phoenix Luna grew up in Tokyo's Tochigi Prefecture. He had a difficult upbringing and at one point was forced to live in a youth institution when his father abandoned his family and his mother could not afford to raise him. After graduating middle school, he gained work in the construction industry, but after a few years quit due to personal issues and ended up homeless on the streets of Tokyo. At just 20 years old, he was penniless and impoverished, but being young and good-looking, he managed to find work as a bar host at a joint called Fusion by Youth. For those that don't know, Tokyo's Kabukicho district is home to a number of bars and clubs known as Hatsuto Karubu. These are places where female customers pay for male company, who are known as bar hosts. Male hosts pour drinks for their clients and will often engage in flirtatious conversations. These conversations are generally lighthearted, and hosts tend to have a variety of entertainment skills, ranging from simple magic tricks to the ability to tell engaging stories. A host's age usually ranges from 18 to 27, and they will often take a stage name, usually taken from a favorite manga, film, or historical figure that describes their character or persona, hence why the young man in question is known here as Phoenix Luna, and not by his birth name, which he has kept a closely guarded secret. Men who become hosts are often those who either cannot find a white-collar job or are enticed by the prospect of high earnings through commission. It was these prospects that attracted Luna to the hosting scene, and the job saved him from a life of homelessness and destitution. But it was through his work as a bar host that Luna met a person that would change his life forever, a 21-year-old woman named Yuka Takaoka. Yuka was employed as the manager of a so-called girls' bar, the female equivalent of the kind of place Luna worked at. She worked long hours and found it very difficult to meet men she was actually attracted to, and found herself frequenting host bars since they revolved around a concept she understood all too well. This was how she met Luna, and upon meeting him in October of 2018, she was instantly smitten. Over the next 7 months, she cultivated a kind of relationship with him and became one of his regular customers. Luna made her feel special, often telling her that he liked her and that he wished to be with her. Hosts are generally forbidden from socializing with their clients outside of working hours, but Luna made an exception for Yuka. They often met at Yuka's 5th floor apartment in Shinjuku Ward, where they shared food and watched movies, and after a few months of doing so, Yuka asked Luna if he would like to pursue an exclusive relationship with her. Luna replied that he would, but was taken aback when one of her conditions for doing so was that he quit hosting and find a regular job. She was adamant that he would have to stop flirting with other women, whether that be in a professional capacity or otherwise. This was something Luna could not adhere to. He enjoyed his work and considered his fellow hosts as a kind of surrogate family. Reluctantly, he was forced to decline Yuka's offer, but told her they could continue to see each other if that was something she wanted. Yuka was heartbroken. She adored Luna and became increasingly depressed as a result of his rejection. This depression morphed into jealousy and thoughts of taking her own life, and eventually, Yuka hatched a plan for the pair to be together forever. On May the 23rd, 2019, Yuka asked Luna to meet her at her apartment to assist with some cleaning work. They agreed to meet at around noon, but due to work commitments, Luna was delayed by around 3 hours. By the time he arrived, he was exhausted and told Yuka that he would like to take a nap before they commenced the cleaning work. Luna took a quick bath and then climbed into bed with Yuka, where he fell asleep in her arms. He awoke a short time later with an intense pain in his stomach. At first, Luna thought he was suffering from stomach cramps after eating bad food, but when he looked down, he saw the bed sheets were soaked with blood. That's when he saw a large kitchen knife buried into his gut, turning to see Yuka standing over him, her eyes wide with feverish anger. Coursing with adrenaline, Luna leapt from the bed and ran from the apartment to escape his obsessive attacker and to seek medical help. But Yuka gave chase. Luna managed to fight her off as they reached the building's elevator, but had lost so much blood by the time he reached the lobby that he collapsed to the floor and passed out. But before he lost consciousness, Luna saw Yuka kneeling over his body. "Please don't kill me," he begged. "I like you." Yuka smiled, and the world went black. Police soon received a call that a man had been stabbed in an apartment complex in Shinjuku. They arrived shortly afterward to find the unconscious Luna with Yuka sitting by his body, covered in his blood and smoking a cigarette. A photograph was taken of this scene, which quickly circulated online, a photograph that is still remarkably easy to obtain via Google image searches. Yuka was quickly arrested, putting up no resistance, and showed absolutely no remorse for her actions. In fact, there is another photograph of Yuka that was taken while she was sitting in the back of the police car after she'd been arrested. A huge, excited smile is etched across her face, which is extremely disturbing given that she had recently almost disemboweled someone she claimed to love so much. When police questioned her motives for the crime, Yuka told them, "Since I loved him so much, I just couldn't help it. I was sad and seeking to die and thought how I would like to go about it," she said. "I thought I would kill him because I thought that was how I could be with him. I thought that expressions such as 'I like you' and 'I'd like to be with you' would become a reality if we both die. I did not want to go anywhere, so I sat down at the outside staircase. I didn't call emergency services because I intended to end my own life after watching him die from the stabbing." In the aftermath of the stabbing, social media users all over the world fixated over her behavior, especially those with an interest in the Japanese concept of yandere, a name used to describe obsessive, jealous female lovers. Those with an interest in the phenomenon shared Yuka's Instagram account, one where she posted images of her dressed as various anime characters, which attracted all kinds of unsavory male attention from those who idolized her good looks and painfully overlooked her murderous psychopathology. Some even said she was too beautiful to be an attempted murder suspect. Luna had lost so much blood in the incident that it took him 5 whole days to regain consciousness in a nearby hospital. Doctors have him a mere 1 in 5 chance at recovery when he had first arrived, but somehow he had beaten the odds and pulled through after a series of surgeries to repair the catastrophic damage done to his internal organs. At first, I had no voice, so speaking was not possible, and I was bedridden, so I couldn't walk alone for a while, Luna said in a statement to journalists. I also couldn't eat after the incident, and I got quite thin. When I thought back to when I was stabbed and considered what I'd do in the future, I was unable to sleep due to anxiety and fear, and for that I received counseling. Yet bizarrely, despite his near-death experience at the hands of Yuka, Luna stated that he did not hold any ill feeling toward her. "I do not hold a grudge. I think there's a reason for her to stab me. It was also thanks to her that I was able to achieve the sales that I did in less than a year since I'd become a host." The incident also had one unexpected result. After Luna arrived at the hospital, police sought to locate one of his blood relatives. "I met my older brother and older sister for the first time in 5 years," he said. "I'll be very happy to stay in touch with them in the future. I think we can agree that the result is a heartwarming, wholesome end to a frankly terrifying ordeal, and that Luna had showed an extraordinary amount of bravery to return to his job as a bar host. But surely, it is only a matter of time before another girl develops an obsession with him, and we can only hope that it doesn't end in the same terrifying, bloody way."
This incident happened to me about 6 years ago when I was returning from my office. Back then, I was working as a bank manager in a government-based bank. I was happy with my job, and everything was going swimmingly until that day. One specific day, I had a heck of a lot of work to do, so I was working even after my office hours. That day, I worked till 10 p.m. until everything was finished. After that, I packed my stuff and left the office. I always preferred using public transport, so I went to the bus stop, which was near my office, and waited for the bus to arrive. I kept on waiting for a continuous half an hour, but no bus or other transport seemed to pass through that route since it was already 11 p.m. I thought maybe today I had to book a cab as I was already late, and I didn't want to be late anymore. I was booking a cab when I noticed the bus coming in front of me. I was happy since I was not expecting any public transport buses to come at this late hour. I kept my phone in my pocket and boarded the bus. I went in and sat on the last corner seat. I could see the conductor, but since I could book the ticket online, I didn't go to him and booked the ticket on my own. I was continuously looking at the conductor so that I could show him that I had booked the ticket, but he wasn't looking at me and was continuously looking in front. I had already booked the ticket, so I had no worries. So I sat there as I was exhausted from all the extra work. I closed my eyes, and within a minute, I fell asleep. I was tired, so I didn't notice that I slept for a continuous half an hour. When I woke up, I found my bus standing in an unknown area, totally covered with silence. Everyone in the bus was sitting silently, without saying anything. The weird thing was that they all were looking directly in front, including the conductor, and were not moving at all. I was alone there, moving my body, and looked shocked after seeing my bus standing at such a weird place. I wanted to go out, but the doors of the bus were closed and could only be opened by the driver. I stood up from my seat and went to the conductor to ask him why the bus was standing there and which area was that. I was sure that I had not been to this route before. I went to him and asked him about this, but he didn't listen to me. He kept on looking in front without moving. This was a little strange for me. Soon, I noticed that he was not even blinking his eyes. No human alive could do that for that much time. No, his silent posture was scaring me. I went back to my seat, but as soon as I turned back, I noticed a lady sitting beside me. Honestly, I didn't see her coming in and sitting beside me. I was terrified and was shaking. I just sat beside her and looked at her. She was also gazing in front, without moving, and like the conductor, even she was not blinking her eyes. I offered her a smile, but she didn't smile back. I was feeling uncomfortable in the bus, as no voice was there, no one was talking, even in the very dim light of the moving bus. He felt something sticky in the seat. I looked at my hand and found that my hand was all covered in blood. I screamed with fear, and I saw the lady was bleeding profusely. I was shocked that she was bleeding that much, and even then, she was sitting there so calmly and wasn't even reacting. She started to stare at me, and out of fear, I ran towards the conductor of the bus. I was looking at the lady and explaining the whole situation to the conductor, and I was surprised to death when I looked at his face. He was also bleeding heavily from his head. I jumped to the other seat in fear, and soon I found that everyone there was in the same condition. I started to think that I was in hell. Before I could say anything, the conductor told me, "Sir, don't worry about seeing our blood. We all are dead." That scene was the scariest of all. After this, I ran to the door and started pulling it to open it. Suddenly, the door opened and I was out of the bus. I started running on the road without thinking about the direction, but soon I was hit by an invisible thing and fainted. I don't know what happened after that, but when I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital. Later, I found out that a cop who was passing through that route found me in that condition and took me to the hospital. The cop came and asked me what I was doing there. I told him everything, but he thought that I was drunk or something and didn't believe me. He asked me to take care of myself and left from there. After that day, I didn't tell this incident to anyone because I knew that no one would believe me. But I can never forget that incident ever in my life.
My mom is really good friends with one of the wealthiest people in our town. They have a daughter, my age. I don't have a crush on her or anything, but my mom has pushed me to ask her out before. Never did. Here's the weird thing about the situation, though. My mom and this friend, along with her daughter, all kind of act like their friend. Like a bunch of high school girls getting together to gossip. My mom works in a beauty salon, so I guess I understand why she likes to act that way, but it's still pretty weird nonetheless. There was one specific occasion when this woman and her daughter were going to visit New York City. They decided to invite my mom for some reason. I don't understand why. I guess they really were better friends than I had previously believed. But my mom decided to say yes. So it was just me and my dad at the house, but here was the thing. They didn't have a dad at home. Their house was going to be completely unsupervised for the entire weekend. I was in my early 20s at the time, so I guess they thought it would be a good idea to ask if I would watch the house for them, which I agreed to do. I didn't get paid or anything, but they said I was allowed to eat as much food as I wanted, and considering that they were rich, I thought, why not? This also gave me an opportunity to write some short stories. I always loved writing, and I published some of my stuff online sometimes. I think it was that Friday night when I was watching their house. They told me that they had 2 cats, but they were really scared of strangers, and I was probably not going to see either one of them the entire night. It didn't bother me. I just had to make sure that they had food and water, which they did. I was chilling at the kitchen table, pounding the keys on my laptop on my latest story, when, all of a sudden, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I looked up from my computer to notice the ugliest cat I've ever seen in my life. Just imagine a hairless cat, but also morbidly obese and cross-eyed. It was honestly the strangest thing I've ever seen. Any one of those traits individually would have made a cat kind of cute, but seeing all of them thrown together in one pitiful excuse for a pet almost made me want to bust a gut laughing. I felt kind of bad for laughing so hard at this girl's cat, but it's not like I hurt it or anything. That had been a good break from writing, but then I got back into it. I remember being in the middle of writing a really interesting scene. This ghost was abducting the protagonist of the story. It's kind of a psychological thriller with a little bit of paranormal thrown in there. It's very spiritual and weird. I'm kind of a weird person. But that scene still sticks with me because as I'm writing it, I noticed something outside. There was a man in a hooded sweatshirt walking around. I sat at the kitchen table, stunned. I didn't know what to do. I felt the adrenaline burst through my veins. Fight or flight. Well, I figured that my car was outside, so running wasn't going to do me much good. And after a minute of rationalizing the situation, I had no proof that this person was out to do anything bad. For all I knew, this could have been a jogger. I got up close to one of the windows to watch this man. He seemed to be sneaking around. He wasn't coming toward the house I was in, so I figured that I was at least safe for the moment. But then I noticed him looking into the window of the house across the street. I can only assume that he was checking houses to see if people were home or not. Must have been an actual burglar. Just show up in the wealthy neighborhood and see who isn't home. I don't know why he would do it at night, though. Looks as suspicious as he did. We live in a gun state, after all. And after a few minutes went by, and I could tell that there were people at home at the house he was checking out. By the time he realized, I noticed him do a 180. He was walking in my direction now. I was about to be face to face with this man. I saw him walking across the street and I immediately started to panic. I called the police as fast as I could and told them the situation, but they said it would be about 20 minutes before anyone could be here. I ran up to the attic to hide. I locked the door behind me. In retrospect, this was my biggest mistake. I should have turned on a bunch of lights and made it obvious that someone was here. I'm good at thinking, just not in the moment. The house must have looked uninhabited by the time I had gotten up to the attic. This made the house the perfect place to burglarize and steal everything. I was in the attic for about 10 minutes when I heard a window breaking downstairs. He was in the house. My heartbeat was inside of my forehead. He walked around the house for a few minutes. Thud. Thud. I heard the humongous boots marching across the wooden floors. He explored the house for a good while. I was really beginning to wonder where the police were. Typical. I heard him get close to the attic entrance, and that was the moment that pushed me over the edge. I started screaming at the top of my lungs that I had a gun. I told him that I was going to shoot his head off if he didn't leave the house immediately. And to my absolute shock, he ran away. I watched him run down the street as I looked on through the window. It appeared that this guy was even more scared for his life than I was. The police eventually got there and I told them the entire story from beginning to end. They said that a couple of people had been reporting this guy in nearby neighborhoods, so this wasn't the first night he's been out doing this. The police explained that this guy hadn't been violent on any of the occasions they'd been called. They said it was about the 7th time this month that they have responded to a similar incident in a wealthy neighborhood. I guess he's going around looking for an easy way to make money. He hasn't been face to face with any of the homeowners yet, so maybe he isn't a violent criminal, just a criminal in general. I found the entire experience really interesting yet mortifying. Living through it was probably the most scared I've ever been. My mom, her friend, and their daughter didn't even come back early from their trip after it happened. I thought that was a lame move, but what do I know? For revenge, I ate every single pizza roll they had in the freezer, and if you're wondering, there were 3 bags of 90 pizza rolls. I ate over 270 pizza rolls that weekend, and I have no regrets. I sorely needed them after that borderline traumatic experience with the burglar. In late June of 2014, a 28-year-old German man by the name of Lars Mittank took a vacation to the Bulgarian seaside resort of Golden Sands. Popular with tourists from all over Europe, Golden Sands is a major resort town on the northern Bulgarian Black Sea coast, adjacent to a national park of the same name in the municipality of Varna. Located just over 15 kilometers north of downtown Varna, it is virtually connected to the city by a continuous swath of resorts and villa communities. On the 6th of July, Lars and his group of friends found themselves in a disagreement with another group of young German men in a local bar. Lars and his companions were fans of the German football team Werder Bremen, while the opposing group were Bayern Munich supporters. There was a rather high-profile rivalry between the two football clubs, and the playful disagreement soon descended into a violent confrontation when one member of each group began pushing and shoving each other. The fight between the two of them quickly became a full-on bar brawl between the two groups. Chairs and bottles were thrown, pool cues were used as weapons, and in the fray, Mittank suffered a ruptured eardrum from a particularly vicious strike. Mittank was forced to visit the local doctor to have his head examined. It was discovered that the injury was a particularly nasty one that came with a rather high risk of internal infection. So the doctor prescribed a course of the antibiotic cefuroxime and advised Lars not to fly for the next couple of weeks, as it would risk seriously exacerbating the injury and cause a grievous amount of pain. He would also require another examination at the Bulgarian hospital in the coming weeks in order to ensure the wound was properly on the mend. So, Lars stayed in Bulgaria while his friends drove to the airport and flew back to Germany. He took a taxi back to the Hotel Color Varna, making reservations that would cover his recuperation period, then tried to spend the next few days relaxing and healing from his particularly nasty wound. But just a day after his friends left him behind in Bulgaria, Lars began to act very oddly indeed. His bizarre and erratic behavior was captured by the hotel's closed-circuit television security cameras. He ran around the hotel, looking over his shoulder, accusing staff and guests alike of plotting against him. A few of those encounters almost turned violent, and on more than one occasion, the hotel staff threatened to call the police. Finally, once Lars's behavior had become unbearable, the hotel staff asked him to gather his belongings and leave, as such violent outbursts were strictly against hotel policy and could no longer be tolerated. But before he checked out of the hotel, Lars made a call to his mother back in Germany. She later stated that he seemed extremely upset and told her in hushed tones that 4 German men, possibly the same his friend group fought with in the bar that day, were coming to kill him. He told her that he had made a significant withdrawal of cash to live off of and that she should cancel his credit cards. When she asked why, Lars told her that the men could use them to track his movements. Where he got such an idea is a mystery, but he seemed very, very insistent that this was the case. We know that on the 8th of July, Lars Mittang traveled to Varna Airport in an attempt to travel back home to Germany, against the doctor's wishes. He attempted to purchase a ticket on a flight back home, but after looking around the airport and apparently seeing something, became so flustered and frightened that he abandoned the attempt altogether. Lars then sought out a medical services area of the airport, although it is clear that he did not ask for any medical attention and would not tell those inside why he wished to remain there. They later confirmed that he seemed jumpy and paranoid, as if though he was hiding from someone that was hunting him. About 45 minutes after originally taking shelter in the medical services area, the airport's CCTV cameras capture some kind of construction worker making their way over to the medical area. This seems to have triggered Lars into rushing out of the airport, having abandoned his backpack and luggage altogether. More CCTV footage shows Lars running across a 2-lane highway, dodging speeding vehicles as he does so before reaching a large fence. Lars scaled the fence with frightening strength and speed, then sprints full pelt across a meadow before disappearing into a field of sunflowers with a set of deep woods beyond them. Police investigated the incident thoroughly but found no evidence that Lars was being followed by anyone. They even contacted the group Lars's friends had fought with, but they all had alibis that confirmed that they were nowhere near the airport on the day of Lars' disappearance. Many theories about what happened are all over the internet. Some theories believe that he was being used as a drug mule. Some believe that he suffered a psychotic episode. Only 2 things are completely certain regarding this behavior and unexplainable incident. The first is that Lars did not suffer from any form of mental illness. The second is that Lars was never seen again, anywhere, or by anyone.
The picturesque town of Dyersburg, Tennessee, nestled along the Mississippi River, is the kind of place where neighbors know each other and life is quiet. But in 2015, the town became the focus of national attention due to the mysterious disappearance and subsequent murder of Karen Swift, a 44-year-old mother of 4. What began as a seemingly ordinary day with a yard sale ended in tragedy, leaving behind a puzzle that remains unsolved to this day. On October 30th, 2015, Karen Swift spent her Saturday hosting a yard sale at her home. A devoted mother, she was known for her vivacious personality and active involvement in the community. The yard sale drew numerous visitors throughout the day as Karen cheerfully interacted with buyers, many of whom were neighbors and acquaintances. For Karen, it was an opportunity to declutter her home and connect with others in her close-knit community. That evening, Karen attended a Halloween party with friends.
She returned home late and spoke briefly with her estranged husband, David Swift, who still lived in the family home despite their ongoing divorce proceedings. According to reports, the two had a cordial but strained relationship, sharing the residence to co-parent their children. In the early hours of October 31st, Karen went missing. When Karen's friends and family realized that she had vanished, alarm bells went off. Her car, a white 2004 Nissan Murano, was found abandoned on a rural road just a few miles from her home. The vehicle's tires were flat, and her belongings, including her purse and phone, were left inside. However, there was no sign of Karen herself. Dyer County authorities immediately launched a search. Friends, family, and volunteers combed through nearby wooded areas, fields, and waterways, hoping to find any trace of Karen. Her disappearance struck fear into the hearts of the community, as speculations swirled about what might have happened. Was she abducted by someone that she met at the yard sale? Was her estranged husband involved, or was it the work of a stranger? The case took a devastating turn on December 10, 2015, when Karen's decomposed body was discovered in a wooded area near a cemetery, less than 3 miles from her home. Her remains were concealed under foliage, and the area appeared to have been deliberately chosen to hide her body. An autopsy revealed that she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head. The discovery confirmed what many had feared. Karen Swift had been murdered. However, the identity of her killer remained a mystery, and the investigation into her death became more complex as authorities sifted through a growing list of suspects. Karen's life was undergoing significant changes at the time of her death. She had recently filed for divorce from David Swift, citing irreconcilable differences. Friends described the marriage as troubled, with Karen seeking a fresh start. The divorce proceedings, however, were contentious, and David's behavior came under scrutiny following Karen's disappearance. In addition to her marital struggles, Karen had been involved in local fitness groups and was active on social media. Her outgoing personality and wide circle of acquaintances led investigators to explore whether someone she knew could have harbored ill intentions. One of the more intriguing aspects of the case was the yard sale Karen hosted on the day before her disappearance. A yard sale is a public event attracting strangers to a private residence. Investigators considered the possibility that Karen's killer might have been someone who attended the sale and used it as an opportunity to target her. However, no concrete evidence linked any of the yard sale attendees to the murder. As the investigation progressed, David Swift became a person of interest. Though he publicly denied any involvement, his strained relationship with Karen and his presence at the family home on the night of her disappearance drew suspicion. Friends of Karen claimed that she expressed fear of David in the weeks leading up to her death, and there were rumors of past domestic disputes. And despite these allegations, authorities did not charge David Swift with any crime. He cooperated with the investigation and maintained his innocence, but the cloud of suspicion continued to hang over him. Other theories emerged as well. Some speculated that Karen's killer could have been a stranger who abducted her after her car broke down. Others suggested that she might have been the victim of someone she had met through her social circles or online activity. However, none of those theories produced definitive leads. As months turned into years, the investigation into Karen Swift's murder stalled. Despite the efforts of law enforcement and private investigators, no arrests were made and no new evidence came to light. The lack of witnesses and forensic evidence left the case at a standstill, frustrating Karen's family and friends. The community of Dyersburg remained haunted by Karen's death. Her children, left without their mother, faced the difficult task of moving forward while grappling with unanswered questions surrounding her murder. Karen's friends continued to advocate for justice, organizing memorials and raising awareness about her case in the hopes of keeping it in the public eye. Several key questions remain unanswered. Who killed Karen Swift? Was it someone she knew or a random attacker? Investigators have never publicly identified a suspect or motive. The flat tires on Karen's vehicle suggest that she may have been forced to stop, but it's unclear whether this was staged or coincidental. While there is no evidence tying the yard sale to her murder, the timing raises questions about whether someone who attended the sale might have returned later. and despite extensive efforts by law enforcement, the case remains unsolved, leading to frustration and speculation about investigative missteps or lack of resources. Karen Swift's murder remains one of the most perplexing and tragic cases in Tennessee's recent history. Her family continues to seek answers, holding out hope that new evidence will emerge or that someone with knowledge of the crime will come forward. In the meantime, her case serves as a chilling reminder of how quickly life can change and the enduring pain of unanswered questions. For the residents of Dyersburg, the loss of Karen Swift is a scar that is yet to heal. Her vibrant spirit and love for her children are remembered, even as the search for her killer continues.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Summer of 2019, I'm browsing some Grindr profiles when I come across this guy that looked like a cuter, twinkier version of my ex-boyfriend, Alejandro. I was smitten. I think I have a thing for Latino guys, and this one ticked all my boxes. He was actually from Argentina, so the accent had me swooning, and after I made him laugh with my terrible Spanish, we agreed to meet up for some cocktails one night at a bar here in Austin. When we met, his attitude was a huge red flag. He seemed temperamental and bratty, but my God, it was the weirdest turn-on for me coming from him. Anyone else and I'd think I'd have been searching for an excuse to leave early. But this guy, I could have sat and listened to him talk for hours. He was so intense and got so mad about certain political topics, but if you hadn't guessed already, that Latin passion was something wild horses couldn't pull me away from. Oh, and another thing, I had expected to be paying for the drinks all night. Not trying to be too presumptive, just a dynamic I'd experienced previously since I was a few years older. But this guy was pulling his credit card out left and right and center, and some of our drink orders were pretty steep. I had no idea how someone so young could afford such amenities, but needless to say, I was impressed. They did, however, talk like a machine gun. They jumped from topic to topic, with the overarching theme being essentially, I have a lot of money, don't need to work, and I don't know what to do with my life. Sounds like one of those good problems, right? In anyone else, that kind of attitude would have maybe rubbed me the wrong way, but like I said, I could have listened to that accent all night. At one point during the date, this absolute bear of a man approached my date, whispered something in his ear, and my date kind of waved him away. My first thought is that this person was asking if they could buy him a drink and that he'd rightly dismiss them since he was out with me. But there was something else about the way they acted that made me think they'd met previously. I asked my date if he knows that guy, and he says no. But some people aren't very good at lying, and my date was one of them. I just smiled, nodded, and took the answer at face value. It wouldn't do me any good to start a pointless argument at this stage. And besides, it wasn't long after that they let slip about something that explained some of their more erratic behavior, and maybe even that weird interaction with the older guy. He told me that he was sorry if it seemed a little tense. It's just that he missed his daddy, who had been in an accidental shooting and was still recovering in the hospital. I told him he didn't have to talk about it and that I was really sorry it had happened, but he took it upon himself to vent about it to me, and I was more than willing to be the shoulder to cry on, so to speak. But after I noticed a few weird inconsistencies with what they were saying, creepiness and red flags started popping everywhere, and the more he talked, the more it sounded like his family was involved in some kind of organized crime. I thought I might have just been a bit overdramatic and, well, assuming a Latino guy was involved in crime just because he has money? That's some problematic thinking right there, I thought. But it wasn't the incident with his wallet that convinced me he was bad news. A few hours into the date, the tough-looking guy approaches him again, and he doesn't show a shred of shame that I'd obviously caught him lying. Another huge red flag right there, but the date was about to end, so again, no point making a scene over it. My date apologizes, tells me he has to leave, and promises me that he'll text me before he gets up and leaves. But, oh no. He's left his wallet on the table, and when I finally notice, I chase after him to give his wallet back. I'm almost caught up to him in the street outside the bar when the tough-looking guy tackles me so hard it almost knocks me off my feet. The guy is cursing in Spanish at me, winding up his fist to knock my teeth out, and I'm completely terrified, begging him, please don't hit me, he forgot his wallet. I have, insert the guy's name's wallet. And there wasn't even a hint of an apology from either of them. That guy's card must have had a limit in the thousands, but they didn't seem to be bothered that he'd almost lost it, nor that I'd been nice enough to return it. Again, that really didn't sit right with me, but I didn't get any confirmation on this until months later. I told my roommate about the weird date, and she was fascinated. Being something of a true crime addict, she was dying to know if the guy I'd been out with was the son of some Mexican cartel kingpin or something. But I told her she could safely rule that out since he was, Argentinian, not Mexican, but that turned out to be the one piece of information she'd need. Turns out his dad was killed over drug-related matters and was apparently quite the rising star in the Rio Negro cocaine trade down there in Argentina. The killers hadn't been caught yet, and everything was incredibly sketchy. It was not a professional, but a partner in crime. Some kind of business arrangement gone very, very wrong, and they were trying to throw the cops off the scent by telling people it was, drumroll, an accidental shooting. Then, when I saw a picture of the guy who had been shot, he looked exactly like an older, less moisturized version of my date. It was uncanny. That's when the penny dropped, and I knew where all that wealth came from. And not only that, but disparate clues were all over those articles which pointed out that he might just be the next target, and that a huge chunk of their money had gone missing. I can't remember exactly what the article said, but it heavily implied that the dealer's family had gone into hiding somewhere, having probably taken the stolen money with them, and if this was true, they'd most definitely be the target of rival cartel hitmen. The man who kept bothering us wasn't some interloper looking to steal my date from me. He was a bodyguard, something I hadn't quite figured out at the time of the tackling incident. I know, but hindsight is 20/20, isn't it? And this also meant that there was a slim chance that whoever was looking to kill him might have found him while he was out on our date. Maybe that's why they got out of there so suddenly. They'd been tipped off or something, maybe felt something was off or wrong. I could have been killed in the crossfire. Maybe they'd have thought that I was involved somehow and just killed me too. Obviously, I didn't want to see the guy again, but I did feel like I owed him an explanation. He had enough going on in his life, and I didn't want to give an already damaged person some kind of abandonment complex. But when I went to text, the message wouldn't deliver. And when I called, a recorded message told me the number had been disconnected. To be honest, I think they got him. Maybe only 36 hours after our date. I think I really did narrowly dodge witnessing a murder happen right in front of my eyes. And let me tell you, that's not something I ever want to have to consider, ever again.
On the morning of October 19, 1971, Cheryl Spiegel woke up a very excited young lady. It was her 10th birthday, and although she was headed to school that morning, her family had promised her cake and presents on her return home. Obviously, she was very excited. It was her day, her special day, so it was only natural that the birthday girl got a few extra minutes in bed, especially when her regular wake-up time was around 5:30 in the morning. If this meant that Cheryl didn't depart for the school bus with her brothers as she normally did. Instead, she left the house at around 6:25 a.m., headed out into the dark, foggy fall morning all alone. It was a walk that should have just taken a few minutes tops, but Cheryl never made it to school that day. In fact, the morning of Cheryl's birthday will be the last time anyone would see her alive in the mysteries surrounding her death, with puzzle professional and amateur detectives alike for years to come. Following her missing persons report being filed, local police officers conducted interviews with classmates, neighbors, and members of the Spiegel family itself, but not a single person could provide any useful information. The streets had been all but deserted when Sherwood appeared, when local newspaper began reporting sightings of Cheryl in the surrounding area. The police focused their investigation around the possibility of her running away from home, a dire mistake at a crucial time in the investigation, as it amounted to little more than wishful thinking. Because around 2 weeks later, a milk delivery driver was out on his usual morning rounds when he found he needed to take a leak. He pulled over to the side of an isolated country road when he noticed an odd grouping of rocks in the creek bed below him. It appeared as though they'd been deliberately stacked almost like a pyramid shape. The driver's curiosity got the better of him, and he headed down the slope to further investigate the odd formation. But when he did so, he noticed a small child-sized arm visible in one of the small crevices. The flesh was hideously discolored, with its owner obviously deceased, so the horrified delivery driver rushed to call 911. Shortly afterwards, emergency services arrived at the scene, collecting the corpse, which would soon be identified as the missing Cheryl Spiegel. The birthday girl had been stabbed a total of 26 times, with some of the stab wounds so deep that they ran through her completely. However, they didn't appear to have been the result of a knife. Rather, the wounds were small and puncture-like in nature, as if she had been stabbed with a needle-like instrument. She had also been stripped completely nude, but thankfully, there was little evidence of any kind of physical violation having occurred in a horrible twist of fate. It was her older brother's 11th birthday when her father was summoned to identify her body, forcing him to bear witness to the savage, frenzied manner in which she had been killed. Cheryl was buried 2 days after her body was found on November 6, 1971. Her family held a small ceremony for her at Highland Cemetery in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, and the search for her killer continued with the ever-pervading question: did her birthday play any significance in her abduction, or was it simply a horrible coincidence? Homicide detectives surveyed the surrounding area but didn't find much of interest. The only pertinent location was a gas station, an ATM machine at a bank, and a McDonald's had stayed open until 5 a.m. Aside from those late-night businesses, there were no reasons to be in the area at such a time. But canvassing the area came up with 4 major persons of interest, all of which were spoken to by police. The first was a man who lived across the street from the Spiegel house. According to more than one witness statement, this man would sometimes sit on the porch or in his car and watch the children, not in a wholesome way either. People say that there was something to this man's stare, something chilling in the years following Cheryl's murder. His concerning behavior continued to make his neighbors uncomfortable, even if he was eventually cleared of suspicion. Although he refused to take a polygraph test, which was highly suspicious, it turned out that he had an airtight alibi, as he had been working as a day laborer for a company in nearby Cincinnati. The second person of interest was another of Cheryl's neighbors, a drug-addicted member of a local car theft ring. He had served prison time, had a history of violence. Some was known to be extremely volatile. His alibi for the morning of Cheryl's disappearance was flimsy at best, and he openly admitted to having seen her walk to the bus stop, making him the last person to see her alive. However, he was open to taking a polygraph test, and he actually passed it, despite several people in the street saying they were terrified of him. The third person of interest was obviously the person who claimed to have found the body, the milk delivery driver. This man lived several counties away from the milk company, but he would end his route each day on the road where Cheryl's body was discovered. This daily proximity to her and her family would have given him ample opportunity to plan a successful kidnapping. However, there was no other evidence of his guilt. The man passed a polygraph test and was said to be emotionally devastated by the accusation. Not long after, the police ruled him out. The fourth and final person of interest was a small business owner from the same town. This man was not initially on the police radar as being involved in Cheryl's murder, but several years after, he was charged with assaulting young girls, pleading guilty in a court of law. There was local talk about him bragging about having stabbed Cheryl and putting her in the creek, but the man flatly denied those rumors as hearsay. Police did interview him and he agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed beyond him supposedly bragging about the murder. There was no forensic evidence to ever tie him to the crime. It should be made clear that Cheryl's dad and stepmother were never considered suspects, and her biological mother was nowhere near Kentucky during the early 70s. However, a couple of interesting facts remain. Cheryl's father said he saw his daughter leave for the bus stop at 6:25 a.m., and no one else reported having seen Cheryl out on the street, which surely would have been busy with other kids and parents out and about that morning. What's more, after Cheryl's body was found, no headstone was ever purchased for her by her immediate family. And the speaker was left town entirely just 2 months later. Cheryl's brother later said that their father never talked about Cheryl or her murder ever again. Whether this was down to guilt or simply grief, it's impossible to know. So what really happened to little Cheryl Spiegel? Was it some kind of horrible accident? Or was foul play to blame? And what exactly made all those tiny pinprick wounds that punctured the length of the breadth of her tiny body? At best, some kind of vicious predatory killer with an unusual weapon cost them. But at worst, someone or something is still out there, and it's hunting children.